The CEO's laughter echoed through the hangar like broken glass. "Fix this helicopter," Vivian Cross announced to the cameras, her manicured finger pointing at the night janitor. "And I'll kiss you right here, right now." The engineers roared. The client smirked. But Caleb Mercer, invisible in his maintenance uniform, calloused hands gripping a mop, didn't flinch. His eyes moved past the mockery, past the woman in designer heels, and locked onto the grounded H-145 like it was whispering secrets only he could hear. What they didn't know would cost them everything. What he was about to reveal would change all their lives forever. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're already hooked, hit that like button and stay until the end. Trust me, you won't see this coming. The February wind screamed through the gaps in the Cross Aviation hangar doors, carrying with it the metallic bite of winter and the kerosene smell of ambition. At 11:47 p.m., the facility should have been silent except for the hum of security lights and the occasional groan of cooling metal. Instead, it blazed like a stadium, every overhead lamp burning bright, casting harsh shadows across the polished concrete floor where a $10 million helicopter sat like a fallen king. Caleb Mercer pushed his maintenance cart along the perimeter, the squeaky front wheel announcing his presence to no one who cared. He was a shadow here, a fixture as unremarkable as the fire extinguishers mounted on the walls. His navy blue uniform hung loose on a frame that had once carried 30 more pounds of muscle, back when he wore different colors and answered to ranks instead of building managers. His name tag, just Mercer, no first name, was slightly crooked, pinned above a breast pocket that held nothing but a worn photograph of a 7-year-old girl with his same gray eyes. The hangar wasn't supposed to be this alive at midnight, but Cross Aviation wasn't supposed to have a grounded helicopter with a Swiss client arriving in 14 hours either, and desperation made people do ugly things to their schedules and their dignity. Caleb had learned that lesson the hard way. "No, no, no!" The voice cut through the industrial space like a blade. "I don't want excuses. I want solutions." Vivian Cross stood in the center of the chaos like a general surveying a losing battle, and she was dressed for war. At 38, she'd built Cross Aviation from her father's failing charter service into a boutique helicopter sales and customization company with clients across 3 continents. She wore power like other women wore perfume, deliberately, expensively, and with the intention of making everyone in proximity aware of it. Tonight it came in the form of a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Caleb's monthly salary, paired with heels that clicked against concrete like gunshots. Her dark hair was pulled back so severely it seemed to sharpen her features. High cheekbones, strong jaw, eyes the color of expensive whiskey, and just as likely to burn going down. She was beautiful in the way that corporate portraits and magazine profiles were beautiful. Carefully constructed, strategically lit, and just a little bit dangerous. "Run the diagnostic again," she snapped at a man in a Cross Aviation polo shirt, his tablet glowing in his trembling hands. "There has to be something we're missing." "We've run it 6 times, Ms. Cross." The engineer, Henderson according to his name badge, looked like he'd aged a decade in the past 3 hours. "The software says everything is functioning within normal parameters. There's no electronic fault we can identify." "Then explain to me why a $4 million Airbus H-145 is sitting on my floor like an expensive paperweight." Vivian's voice ricocheted off the hangar walls. "Explain to me how I'm supposed to look Christoph Bergman in the eye tomorrow and tell him the custom medical helicopter he ordered, with every upgrade, every specification he requested, doesn't actually fly." Caleb slowed his cart, his mop making lazy circles on floor that was already clean. He'd learned the art of invisible observation during his first month here. People said things around janitors they'd never say around colleagues. They revealed truths they'd hide from anyone who mattered, because janitors didn't matter. "The pressure valve system shows optimal readings," another engineer offered, a younger woman whose name tag read Martinez. She stood beside a diagnostic cart connected to the helicopter by a tangle of cables. "Fuel flow is perfect. Hydraulics are balanced. On paper, this bird should be purring." "On paper doesn't pay the bills," Vivian shot back. She turned to scan the assembled team, 8 engineers, 2 mechanics, and a videographer who'd been documenting Cross Aviation's behind-the-scenes preparation for the company's social media. The camera's red light blinked steadily, capturing every moment of this spectacular failure. We have 14 hours to figure this out. 14 hours before Bergman arrives with his entourage, his expectations, and his willingness to walk away from this deal if we can't deliver. So unless someone here has a miracle in their back pocket, I suggest Ms. Cross, a voice from the corner, hesitant but urgent, a third engineer older with gray at his temples. Maybe we should call in the manufacturer's specialist team. Airbus has people and have them arrive when? Tomorrow afternoon? Next week? Vivian's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. By the time they clear their schedules and fly here, Bergman will be in Munich buying from our competitors. No. We solve this in-house tonight, or we don't solve it at all. The weight of that statement settled over the hangar like snow. Caleb could see it in their faces. The engineers knew they were outmatched. This wasn't a software glitch or a loose connection. This was something deeper, something mechanical and subtle. And they'd already exhausted their diagnostic playbook. He kept mopping, but his eyes never left the H-145. She was beautiful, he had to admit. Sleek white body with Cross Aviation's logo emblazoned on the tail, the interior visible through the windows, custom medical configuration with state-of-the-art equipment, designed to be a flying emergency room for alpine rescue operations. The rotor blades were stationary now, but Caleb could imagine them cutting through air, the whole machine rising with that particular grace that made helicopters seem like they were defying gravity through pure stubbornness. He'd loved that about rotorcraft. Airplanes were elegant, jets were powerful, but helicopters were honest. They told you every second that they were fighting physics, that they stayed aloft through constant adjustment and perfect balance, that one mistake could bring everything down, just like life. Sir? Martinez had her tablet up, reading something. The diagnostic history shows a minor pressure fluctuation 3 days ago during the test flight. It resolved itself, so we didn't flag it for follow-up. Henderson leaned over her shoulder. How minor? 0.3 bar variance, within acceptable parameters, but... She trailed off, fingers swiping through screens of data. It lasted for about 40 seconds, then normalized. Could be related? Could be anything, Vivian said, but Caleb heard the thread of hope in her voice. She was grasping now, desperate for any lead that might save her company's reputation. Can we access the valve system directly? We can open it up, but it'll take time, Henderson replied. And if we're wrong, we'll have torn apart a perfectly good system for nothing. Then don't be wrong. Caleb reached the north corner of the hangar, where the maintenance closet stood like a confessional. He should have gone inside, stored his cart, clocked out, and driven his 12-year-old Toyota back to the small apartment he shared with Maya. His shift ended at midnight. He had no reason to stay, no obligation to care about a helicopter problem that wasn't his problem. But his hands remembered things his mind tried to forget. He looked at the H-145 again, really looked at it. The way it sat slightly nose down. The faint discoloration around the engine cowling that nobody else would notice in this light. The pattern of condensation on the access panel that suggested temperature irregularities in the valve housing. He'd seen this before. Different bird, different war, different lifetime. All right, people, let's approach this systematically. Vivian was rallying her troops, her voice crisp with forced confidence. Henderson, you and Martinez open up the valve system carefully. Document everything. The rest of you, review every test flight log from the past month. If there's a pattern, I want it found. The team scattered to their tasks with the urgent efficiency of people who knew their jobs depended on success. The videographer adjusted his position, capturing B-roll of engineers at work, the kind of content that would make great promotional material if they actually solved the problem. Caleb turned toward the closet, ready to disappear into the night where he belonged. And where do you think you're going? He froze. The voice wasn't directed at him, couldn't be directed at him, but when he glanced back, Vivian Cross was staring directly at him, with an expression somewhere between surprise and disdain, as if she'd just noticed a stain on expensive upholstery. Shift's over, ma'am, Caleb said quietly. He'd learned to make his voice smaller here, to take up less space in conversations just like he took up less space in rooms. Just heading out. The janitor. She said it like she was identifying a species. Then something shifted in her face, some calculation happening behind those whiskey eyes. The videographer had turned his camera toward them, sensing a moment. Actually, stay right there. Caleb's instincts prickled. Nothing good ever came from being noticed by people like Vivian Cross. "Ma'am, I really should—" I said stay. She was walking toward him now, her heels marking each step like a countdown. The engineers had paused their work to watch, sensing a shift in the room's energy. "You're here every night, right? Cleaning, watching, listening to everything that happens in this hangar." "I do my job, ma'am." "Your job." She stopped 3 feet away, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive and sharp, like ambition distilled into a bottle. "Tell me something, Mr.—" She glanced at his name tag. "Mercer. In all your watching and listening, have you developed any opinions about helicopters?" The trap was so obvious it was almost insulting. She was setting him up for entertainment, something to break the tension for her exhausted team. The night janitor with ideas above his station. It would be funny, briefly, and then he could leave. "No, ma'am, I just clean. Just clean." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "How refreshingly humble. But you're looking at my helicopter like you understand it, like you can see something we can't." Several engineers chuckled. Martinez looked uncomfortable, like she didn't want to watch whatever was about to happen but couldn't look away. "I don't understand anything about helicopters, ma'am," Caleb said evenly. "I know where the mops are kept. That's about it." "That's about it," Vivian repeated, mocking his cadence. She turned to address the room, playing to her audience now. "You know what I love about this company? Merit. You work hard, you know your craft, you rise, you fake it, you fall. Simple as that." She spun back to him. "So here's what I'm thinking, Mercer. You've been watching my engineers struggle with this problem for hours. You've seen millions of dollars of machinery sitting useless on this floor, and you're telling me you have absolutely no thoughts about what might be wrong?" "I clean floors, Ms. Cross. I don't fix helicopters." "But if you did fix helicopters," she pressed, stepping closer, "what would you look at first?" The hangar had gone completely quiet. Even Henderson had set down his tools to watch this public dissection. The camera was recording everything, and Caleb knew exactly where this was heading. This was what powerful people did when they were frustrated. They found someone beneath them and made a show of power, just to remind everyone who was in charge. He should walk away. He should smile politely, make an excuse, and disappear into the February night. But his eyes drifted past Vivian's shoulder to the H-145, and he saw it again. The slight cant, the discoloration, the condensation pattern that told a story if you knew how to read it. "The pressure valve system," he heard himself say. The room seemed to inhale. Vivian's eyebrows rose. "The pressure valve system, how specific. And what would you do with this pressure valve system, Mercer?" Now he'd stepped in it. Now he had to either back down or commit. He thought of Maya, safe in bed at Mrs. Chen's apartment next door, probably dreaming about her robotics competition. He thought of the bills on his kitchen counter. He thought of all the reasons he'd learned to be invisible. "I'd check for metallic dust accumulation in the housing," he said quietly. "It's rare, but if there was a minor pressure spike 3 days ago, like your engineer mentioned, it could have caused microscopic valve seat degradation. The particles would be too fine for standard diagnostics to flag, but they'd restrict flow just enough to prevent proper pressure maintenance during ignition sequence." The silence that followed was absolute. Henderson broke it first. "That's actually theoretically possible, but the diagnostic would have caught metal particles." "Not if they're still suspended in the valve mechanism itself," Caleb continued, and he could hear his voice changing despite himself, becoming more precise, more technical. "The particles wouldn't show up in the fluid sample. You'd have to physically disassemble and inspect the valve housing under magnification." Martinez was already pulling up something on her tablet. "The pressure variance was brief but sharp. If it damaged the valve seat even minimally—" She looked up at Vivian. "He might be right. It fits the symptom pattern." Vivian was staring at Caleb like she was seeing him for the first time, really seeing him, and he watched her expression shift from surprise to calculation to something that looked almost predatory. "Well," she said slowly, "aren't you just full of surprises?" She turned to address the room again, and Caleb knew whatever was coming next was going to be bad. "My engineers spent 3 hours and couldn't diagnose this problem. But apparently, our night janitor figured it out in 5 minutes, just by looking." She let that sink in, let the engineers feel the weight of it. So here's what I think. I think Mercer here has been hiding some very interesting qualifications. And I think she turned back to him, and her smile was dangerous. I think we should put him to the test. Ms. Cross, I really don't think, Henderson started. Oh, I'm thinking plenty, Vivian interrupted. In fact, I'm thinking so much that I'm going to make this interesting. She raised her voice, making sure everyone could hear, making sure the camera caught every word. Mercer, you seem to know a lot about helicopters for a man who just cleans floors. So here's my offer. You fix this helicopter. You personally diagnose and repair whatever's wrong with my H-145, and I'll kiss you, right here, right now, in front of everyone. The hangar erupted in shocked laughter and gasps. The videographer zoomed in on Caleb's face, capturing his reaction for posterity. Miss Cross, that's completely inappropriate, Martinez objected. Is it? Vivian's eyes never left Caleb. I'm just motivating our hidden expert here. Unless, of course, you were just guessing, Mercer. Unless all that technical knowledge was just lucky improvisation and you're actually as unqualified as your job title suggests. It was masterful, Caleb had to admit. She'd cornered him perfectly. If he backed down now, he looked like a fraud. If he accepted, he became a spectacle, entertainment for her stressed team and content for her social media. Either way, she won. I'm a janitor, he said again, but the words felt hollow now. Then walk away, Vivian challenged. Go back to your mops and your invisibility. Nobody will blame you. She paused. But if you're right about that valve, if you actually know what you're talking about, then maybe you're wasting your talents pushing a cleaning cart around my hangar. She was good. She'd added just enough dignity to the dare that refusing it would feel like cowardice rather than common sense. Caleb looked at the H-145 again. It would take maybe 2 hours to properly disassemble the valve system, inspect it, clean it, if necessary, and reassemble it. He could do it in his sleep. He had done it in worse than sleep, had done it under fire with rounds impacting 20 meters away and rotors spinning overhead and blood on his hands that wasn't his own. But that was a different life. That was before. No, thank you, ma'am, he said, and turned toward the maintenance closet. $5,000. He stopped. Vivian's voice was different now, harder. Fix my helicopter tonight and I'll pay you $5,000 cash, on top of the kiss, which I'm sure will be memorable. More laughter from the engineers, nervous now. That's a lot of money for a janitor, Mercer. Probably 3 months' salary for you. 4 months, actually. 4 months of rent and groceries and Mrs. Chen's childcare fees. 4 months of slowly building the savings account that was supposed to be Maya's college fund but kept getting raided for emergencies. I can't help you, Ms. Cross. Can't or won't? She was angry now, the mask of amusement slipping. Because it's starting to feel like you wasted my time with your theories and your technical knowledge. Like maybe you're not as smart as you pretended to be. Henderson cleared his throat. Ms. Cross, we should probably get back to— Did I ask you, Henderson? She snapped. Then back to Caleb. Last chance, Mercer. Show me I'm wrong about you. Show me you're not just another invisible person in an invisible job. And there it was, the real insult, the one that cut deeper than mockery or money. Invisible. Like the last 10 years of his life had been so small they didn't even register. Like choosing to be there for Maya, to be present for the only person in the world who mattered, was somehow a failing rather than the only thing he'd done right. He turned back slowly. If I fix your helicopter, he said quietly, I don't want your money, and I definitely don't want your kiss. Something flickered in Vivian's expression, surprise, maybe even respect. Then what do you want? This was stupid. This was dangerous. This was every lesson he'd learned about staying small and staying safe thrown directly in the garbage. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Maya in Mrs. Chen's living room 3 days ago, her small hands trying to wire her robotics rover by the dim glow of a desk lamp because the overhead lights in her school's STEM workshop had been out for 2 weeks. Budget cuts, the principal said. Maybe next semester, the principal said. The elementary school on Birch Street, Caleb said. They have a robotics program in the basement workshop. The lights have been out for weeks. Fix them, tonight, before school tomorrow morning. Vivian blinked. That's what you want? Lights in a school workshop? That's what I want. She studied him for a long moment, and Caleb could see her trying to figure out the angle, the manipulation, the hidden agenda. People like Vivian Cross didn't understand that sometimes people just wanted simple things for simple reasons. "Fine," she said finally. "You fix my helicopter by—" She checked her watch. 2:00 a.m. Give you 2 hours. You fix it, I'll have someone at that school by dawn, replacing every light in the building if that's what it takes. You fail, you're fired, and I'll make sure every aviation company in the state knows you're a fraud who impersonated an engineer." "Ms. Cross, he's not an engineer," Martinez protested. "We can't just let him—" "He seems to think he knows what's wrong with my helicopter," Vivian interrupted. "And right now, he's the only person in this hangar who's offered a diagnosis we haven't tried. So either he's right, or he's about to learn a very expensive lesson about speaking up without credentials." She extended her hand to Caleb, a mockery of a business deal. "Do we have an agreement, Mercer? 2 hours. Fix my helicopter. I fix your lights. Yes or no?" Caleb looked at her hand, looked at the engineers watching with expressions ranging from pity to anticipation. Looked at the camera still recording, turning this whole thing into content, into entertainment. Then he looked at the H-145. He took Vivian's hand. Her grip was firm, competitive, the handshake of someone who viewed everything as a negotiation to win. "Yes," he said, "we have an agreement." Vivian smiled, and it was the smile of someone who just won something. "Excellent. Henderson, give him whatever tools he needs. The rest of you, back to work. Let's see if our janitor is as smart as he thinks he is." She walked away, heels clicking, already pulling out her phone to document this moment for whatever social media narrative she was constructing. The engineers dispersed slowly, throwing glances back at Caleb like he was a car accident they couldn't help but watch. Martinez approached him carefully. "Hey, are you sure about this? Because if you're wrong, she'll destroy you. That's not an exaggeration. I've seen her end careers over less." "I know," Caleb said. "And you're really going to try this? You actually know how to—" She gestured at the H-145. "I used to know," Caleb corrected. "Long time ago." She nodded slowly, then surprised him by saying, "Well, for what it's worth, your diagnosis made sense. If you need an extra pair of hands, I can assist. Off the record." "Thank you, but I think I need to do this alone." Martinez left him there, standing in the bright hangar with his maintenance cart and his crooked name tag, and 2 hours to either validate the life he'd left behind or prove that Vivian Cross was right about him being invisible for a reason. Caleb walked to the maintenance closet and opened the door. Behind a shelf of cleaning supplies, hidden under a tarp that hadn't been moved in 3 years, sat a duffel bag he'd brought to this job on his first day and never opened since. He pulled it out, feeling the familiar weight, and unzipped it slowly. Inside were tools that had once been the most important things in his life: precision instruments, some military issue, some custom modified, all maintained with the obsessive care of someone who knew that in his old profession, a stripped bolt or a loose connection could mean the difference between life and death. He'd kept them because throwing them away would have been like throwing away a limb, but he'd hidden them because looking at them every day would have been like staring at a photograph of someone who'd died. Caleb pulled out the tool roll, felt the leather soft and worn under his fingers, and began selecting what he'd need. Torque wrenches calibrated to specific tolerances, precision screwdrivers, inspection mirrors, a jeweler's loop for examining microscopic damage. Everything organized, everything exactly where it should be, muscle memory guiding his hands even after a decade. When he turned around, Henderson was standing there with a diagnostic tablet. The older engineer's expression was complicated, skepticism mixed with curiosity, mixed with what might have been hope. "For what it's worth," Henderson said quietly, "I hope you're right. Not just because we need this bird fixed, but because that theory you offered, it's better than anything we came up with." He held out the tablet. "Access codes and system maps. If you're going in, you'll need these." "Yes," Caleb took the tablet. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You've got 1 hour and 57 minutes. Henderson paused. "Who are you, really?" "Someone who used to be someone else," Caleb replied, which was both true and completely inadequate. He walked to the H-145, his tools in hand, and for the first time in 10 years, He let himself remember what it felt like to be good at something that mattered. The helicopter waited for him like an old friend, like a machine that recognized him even if no one else did. He could hear Vivian across the hangar on her phone, probably already spinning this into some kind of narrative for her company's image. He could feel the engineer's eyes on him, waiting for him to fail. But all of that fell away when he reached up and opened the engine cowling. The valve housing was exactly where he expected it to be, exactly where it had been on 100 other helicopters in 100 other situations. His hands moved without conscious thought, disconnecting pressure lines, removing safety covers, accessing the valve assembly with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd done this operation so many times it was written into his bones. He could feel it now, that old focus, that narrowing of the world until nothing existed except the machine and the problem and the solution waiting to be found. It was like putting on an old coat that still fit perfectly, like speaking a language he'd thought he'd forgotten but had only been sleeping. Caleb pulled out the valve assembly carefully, cradling the precision machine components like they were made of glass. He set up his inspection area on a clean workbench, arranged his tools in the order he'd need them, and began the methodical process of disassembly. Behind him, the hangar continued its urgent buzz of activity. Engineers reviewed logs. Vivian made phone calls. The camera captured B-roll. But none of it touched him now. He was back in another time, another life, where his hands had kept people alive and his knowledge had mattered. The valve seat revealed its secrets under magnification. Fine particles, almost invisible to the naked eye, trapped in the sealing surface. Metallic dust from stress point degradation, exactly as he'd suspected. It would have been easy to miss, easy to overlook. But now that he could see it, the solution was clear. Caleb worked with the patient precision of a surgeon, cleaning each component, inspecting for additional damage, documenting everything on the diagnostic tablet because proper maintenance required proper records. He could feel the old training taking over, the systematic approach, the triple-check methodology, the absolute certainty that shortcuts killed people. An hour passed, then 90 minutes. Vivian appeared at his elbow, startling him. "Well?" "Found the problem," Caleb said without looking up. He was in the middle of a critical torque sequence and couldn't afford distraction. "Give me 15 minutes. "You found—" She leaned in to look at his documentation on the tablet. Metallic particulate contamination in the valve seat, caused by stress fracture propagation during the pressure spike event. She read his notes with what sounded like genuine surprise. "This is detailed, very detailed." "It's standard documentation protocol," Caleb replied, finishing the torque sequence and moving to the next bolt. "You document everything because if something goes wrong later, you need to know exactly what was done and why." "Standard protocol for what?" Vivian pressed. "Who are you, Mercer? Really?" "Right now, I'm someone who needs to concentrate." She didn't leave, but she did stop talking. Caleb finished the reassembly, working backward through the process with the same methodical care. Every connection verified, every seal checked, every tolerance confirmed. He'd learned a long time ago that fast work and sloppy work were two different things, and only one of them kept people alive. At 1:52 a.m., he closed the engine cowling and stepped back. "It's done," he said. The hangar seemed to exhale. Engineers gathered around as Henderson approached with the startup checklist. "You want to do the honors?" he asked Caleb, holding out the tablet. "No," Caleb said. "This is your bird. You run the pre-flight." Henderson nodded, some tension leaving his shoulders, and began the systematic startup sequence. Caleb watched from a distance as the helicopter came to life. Systems powering up, diagnostics running green, the gentle building whine of turbines spinning to operational speed. Then the main rotor began to turn. Slowly at first, gaining speed, the massive blades cutting through the hangar air with that distinctive whoop, whoop, whoop that was somehow both mechanical and alive. The H-145 trembled, testing itself, and then, with a grace that still amazed Caleb after all these years, it lifted. Just a few inches off the ground, just enough to prove that it worked, that it was whole, that whatever had been broken was broken no more. The engineers broke into spontaneous applause. Henderson was grinning. Martinez had tears in her eyes. The videographer captured it all, the moment of triumph, the victory against deadline and desperation. and Vivian Cross stood absolutely still, staring at the hovering helicopter like she was watching something impossible. Henderson brought the bird back down gently, completing the shutdown sequence with obvious relief. He emerged from the cockpit, shaking his head in wonder. Pressure system is perfect. All parameters nominal. Whatever you did, Mercer, it worked. The hangar erupted in celebration. High fives and relieved laughter, and the loose-limbed exhaustion of people who'd been holding their breath for hours. Someone cranked up music. Someone else broke out coffee and donuts that had been waiting for this moment. Vivian walked toward Caleb slowly, and her expression was complicated. "You fixed it," she said, and it sounded almost like an accusation. "I did. In under 2 hours, something my team couldn't figure out in 3 times that long." "They would have gotten there eventually," Caleb said, because it was true, and because he saw no point in making enemies of the engineers. They were working the problem systematically. I just had some specific experience with this type of failure. "Some specific experience," Vivian laughed. But it wasn't the mocking sound from earlier. It was something else. Something that might have been respect mixed with confusion, mixed with realization. "Who taught you to work on helicopters, Mercer?" "The Army," he said quietly. "A long time ago." Understanding dawned in her whiskey eyes. "You were military. You were an engineer." "I was a lot of things. Now I'm a janitor who needs to go home." He started to walk past her, but she caught his arm. Her grip was gentle this time, not competitive. "Wait, you fixed my helicopter. We had a deal. You said you'd fix the lights at Birch Elementary. That's all I want." "No," Vivian said, and now she was smiling, and the smile was different from before. Not predatory, not mocking, but something almost genuine. "I said I'd kiss you too. Right here, right now in front of everyone." She raised her voice, calling the room's attention. "Everyone! Our mystery janitor fixed the impossible helicopter, and I made him a promise." The engineers whooped and whistled. The camera swung toward them, red light blinking. Vivian took a step closer to Caleb, close enough that he could see gold flecks in her eyes, close enough to be theatrical for the audience. "So here it is, Mercer," she said, her voice carrying across the hangar. "I always keep my promises. Are you ready?" And Caleb, who had spent 10 years learning to be invisible, who had trained himself to accept humiliation and mockery and dismissal as the price of being there for his daughter, who had rebuilt his entire life around the principle of staying small and staying safe. Caleb stepped back. "No," he said clearly. The hangar went silent. Vivian's smile faltered. "What?" "I don't want your kiss," Caleb said, and his voice was calm, even, without anger or judgment. "I never did. That was your idea, your show. I just wanted to help, and I wanted those lights fixed, that's all." You could have heard a pin drop on the concrete floor. The videographer kept filming, capturing this moment of unexpected defiance. The engineers looked like they weren't sure whether to be impressed or terrified. Vivian's expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been embarrassment before settling on a careful neutrality. "I see," she said quietly. "You're refusing." "I'm just saying no thank you, ma'am. The helicopter's fixed. That was the real deal. Just make sure those lights get replaced, and we're square." He walked away then, leaving her standing there in front of her employees and her camera and her helicopter that flew because he'd made it fly. He packed his tools back into the duffel bag, zipped it carefully, and stored it again behind the cleaning supplies where it would wait for another decade or another emergency, whichever came first. When he emerged from the maintenance closet, Vivian was there again, blocking his path. But her arms were crossed now, defensive rather than aggressive, and her expression was thoughtful. "I misjudged you," she said simply. "That's rare for me, but I did. I'm sorry." "It's fine." "It's not fine. I made a spectacle of you because I was frustrated and scared, and I took it out on someone who couldn't fight back. That's not fine, Mercer. That's me being a terrible person." She paused. "The lights will be fixed by morning. I'll handle it personally. But can I ask you something?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why do you care about lights in a school workshop? What's at that school that matters more than $5,000 in a moment of glory in front of these people?" Caleb pulled out his wallet and extracted the photograph he kept there. Maya, 7 years old, holding the partially assembled robotics rover she was building, her smile bright enough to power cities. He showed it to Vivian. "My daughter," he said. "She's competing in the state robotics competition next month. She builds her projects in that workshop after school because we don't have space in our apartment. But the lights have been out for 2 weeks, and it's hard to wire circuits by desk lamp, so that's why I care. Not for me, for her." Vivian took the photograph gently, studying Maya's face. When she looked up, something had shifted in her expression. Something softer, something almost vulnerable. "She looks like you," Vivian said. "Same eyes, same determination in the chin." "She's braver than me," Caleb replied, taking the photograph back and replacing it carefully in his wallet. "She's not afraid to be brilliant. I'm trying to make sure the world doesn't teach her to hide it." "By hiding yours?" The question landed like a punch, but Caleb didn't have an answer for it. Or maybe he had too many answers, all of them complicated and painful, and tied up in choices he'd made 10 years ago that still shaped every day of his life. "I need to go," he said instead. "My shift ended an hour ago, and Mrs. Chen charges extra after 1 a.m. Vivian nodded slowly. "Henderson will process your bonus for fixing the helicopter." "I said I didn't want money, and I'm giving it to you anyway because you earned it. Consider it compensation for making my engineers look bad." She smiled slightly. "And for teaching me something about assumptions." Caleb didn't argue. $5,000 was $5,000, and pride was expensive when you were raising a kid alone. "Thank you, Ms. Cross." "Vivian," she corrected. "After tonight, I think we're past formalities." She extended her hand again, but this time it wasn't a mockery or a trap. "You're a good man, Mercer. Better than this place deserves. Better than I deserve." He shook her hand. "You're not as bad as you think you are." "I'm worse," she said, but she was smiling. "But maybe I can learn. Lights will be fixed by 7 o'clock a.m. You have my word." Caleb left Cross Aviation at 2:14 a.m., walking out into February cold that bit through his jacket and made his breath fog white in the parking lot lights. His 12-year-old Toyota started on the third try, the heater coughing out air that wouldn't warm up until he was already home. He drove through empty streets, past closed shops and dark houses, past the elementary school on Birch Street where Maya would arrive in 6 hours to find lights that worked and a workshop where she could see clearly enough to build her dreams. And Caleb Mercer, who had spent 10 years being invisible, allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Not pride. Pride was dangerous. Pride made you visible. But satisfaction. He'd helped. He'd mattered. For one night, his hands had remembered their purpose. It would have to be enough. Because come morning, he'd be back to being just the janitor, just the shadow, just the man nobody noticed unless something needed cleaning. But tonight, just for tonight, he'd been something more. And somewhere in the city, in a hangar that smelled like kerosene and Triumph, a woman named Vivian Cross was staring at a photograph of a 7-year-old girl and wondering what else she'd been too blind to see. The apartment was dark when Caleb turned his key in the lock at 2:47 a.m. The only sound the familiar creak of hinges that needed oil he kept meaning to buy. He moved through the small space by memory and streetlight filtering through thin curtains, past the kitchenette with its perpetually dripping faucet, past the couch that doubled as his bed, to the single bedroom where Maya slept. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching. She was sprawled across her twin bed in the boneless way only children could manage, one arm flung over her stuffed elephant, her dark hair a tangle across the pillow. On her desk, illuminated by the neighbor's porch light through the window, sat the half-finished rover, a maze of wires and servo motors and dreams that she'd been building piece by careful piece. Caleb felt something loosen in his chest, the tension of the night finally releasing. This was why. This was all of it. Not the helicopter, not Vivian Cross's respect or confusion, or whatever complicated emotion had been in her eyes when she looked at Maya's photograph. Just this. His daughter safe and sleeping and building a future that wouldn't require her to be invisible. He closed her door softly and moved to the kitchen, too wired to sleep. The refrigerator hummed its familiar rhythm as he pulled out yesterday's coffee, not bothering to heat it. Through the thin walls, he could hear Mrs. Chen's television still playing. She never slept before 3, said the quiet hours were when she could finally think without the world demanding pieces of her attention. Caleb's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Lights will be installed starting at 6 a.m. Whole workshop will be upgraded. New fixtures, emergency backup system, everything to code. Also replacing lights in the cafeteria and gymnasium because why stop at one room? Invoice going to Cross Aviation. You earned this. You earned. He stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Thank you. The response came immediately. Don't thank me. You blackmailed me in front of witnesses and a camera. Despite himself, Caleb smiled. You made it a public bet. I made it a spectacle. There's a difference. Get some sleep, Mercer, and tomorrow come to my office at 9 a.m. We need to talk. The smile faded. I work nights. Not anymore. 9 a.m. Don't make me send Henderson to drag you in. Caleb set the phone down and stared at it like it might explode. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of. Attention, interest, the kind of visibility that led to questions he didn't want to answer and changes he couldn't afford. He'd fixed the helicopter because Maya needed lights, and because some part of him couldn't watch a machine suffer when he knew how to help. But he'd never wanted what came after. He thought about ignoring the summons. He thought about calling in sick, or simply not showing up, letting Vivian Cross draw whatever conclusion she wanted while he went back to being forgettable. But he also thought about the $5,000 bonus Henderson had mentioned, and how that money could cover 3 months of rent or 6 months of groceries or replace the Toyota's dying transmission. And he knew he'd be at her office at 9 because that's what fathers did. They showed up even when showing up was dangerous. At 6:15 a.m., Maya's alarm clock sang its cheerful electronic song, and Caleb heard her stumble out of bed with the groaning reluctance of all 7-year-olds confronting morning. He'd managed about 90 minutes of sleep on the couch, his body too conditioned to night shifts to fully adjust to being awake at dawn. Dad? Her voice was sleep-rough and confused. Why are you up? Got home late, he said, which was true. Thought I'd make you breakfast. You never make breakfast. You're always sleeping. She padded into the kitchen in her dinosaur pajamas, rubbing her eyes. Then she focused on him properly and frowned. You look tired. I'm okay, sweetheart. You're lying. You do that face when you're lying, the one where your eye does the thing. She demonstrated by scrunching up her own face in an exaggerated wink. Caleb laughed despite his exhaustion. What thing? That thing, the twitchy thing. Maya climbed onto one of the 2 kitchen chairs they owned, her feet swinging above the floor. Did something happen at work? Nothing bad, he said, pulling out eggs and the last of the bread. Actually, I think something good might be happening at your school today. Her eyes went wide. Did they fix the lights? Are they actually going to fix them? That's what I hear. Maya launched herself off the chair and wrapped her arms around his waist, squeezing hard enough to make him grunt. Really? Because Mrs. Patterson said it might be weeks, and I can't finish the obstacle avoidance system in the dark, and the competition is in 3 weeks, and really, Caleb confirmed, running his hand over her tangled hair. All new lights, everything you need. How did you know? Did you call them? Did you yell at someone? She pulled back to look up at him with those gray eyes that were his eyes, that saw through every defense he'd ever tried to build. You did something. I just asked nicely. You're lying again. The eye thing. But she was grinning now, bouncing on her toes with the explosive energy of a child who just received unexpected good news. You're magic. That's what Mrs. Chen says. She says you're secretly magic, and that's why good things happen, even when they shouldn't. Mrs. Chen says a lot of things. She says you're too good for cleaning floors. She says you're like one of those superheroes who pretends to be normal, but actually saves the world when nobody's looking. Caleb felt something catch in his throat. He turned back to the stove, cracking eggs into the pan with more focus than the task required. I'm not a superhero, Maya. I'm just your dad. That's the same thing, she said simply, with the absolute certainty of a child who hadn't yet learned that the world was more complicated than love and protection and showing up. Can I bring the rover to school today? If the lights are really fixed, I want to test the sensors during lunch. If you promise to be careful with it, and if you promise to actually eat lunch instead of just working. I promise. She was already racing back to her room, pajamas flapping, to get dressed and pack her backpack with the careful precision she applied to all her engineering projects. Caleb watched her go and thought about Vivian Cross's question from last night. Why do you hide yours? The answer was complicated, tangled up in a past he'd spent a decade trying to bury, and a present that required him to be small so Maya could be big. But standing here in their tiny kitchen, with its dripping faucet and thrift store furniture, watching his daughter vibrate with excitement about lights that would let her build her dreams. Maybe some sacrifices were worth making. Maybe some invisibility was chosen rather than imposed. Or maybe he was just lying to himself again, and even 7-year-olds could see it. They took the bus to Maya's school, the Toyota's transmission too unreliable for morning traffic. She talked the entire 15-minute ride about her rover's design, about the ultrasonic sensors she was trying to calibrate, about how if she could just get the obstacle detection algorithm right, her robot would be able to navigate the competition course without any remote control input at all. Caleb listened and nodded and asked the right questions, but part of his mind was already at Cross Aviation, already standing in Vivian's office, already dealing with whatever conversation she thought they needed to have. Nothing good came from private meetings with powerful people. He'd learned that lesson in the military, watching officers destroy careers with closed-door discussions that were framed as opportunities but functioned as executions. The school was a low-brick building that had been new in the 1970s and was now held together by optimism and inadequate maintenance budgets. But as they approached, Caleb saw the utility truck parked out front, saw workers in high-vis vests carrying equipment toward the side entrance that led to the basement workshop. Maya saw it too and gasped, "They're really here! Dad, they're actually fixing it!" "Told you." She squeezed his hand hard, then ran toward the entrance where other kids were arriving, already calling to her friends about the workers and the lights and how today was going to be the best day ever. She turned back once, waving, her backpack bouncing with the rover carefully protected inside. Caleb waved back and watched until she disappeared into the building, safe in the world of homework and friendships and robots that only needed to navigate foam obstacles, instead of the complicated terrain of adult decisions. Then he checked his watch, 7:42 a.m., and started the walk to Cross Aviation. It was 3 miles, but he had time, and the cold air helped wake him up in ways coffee never could. The city was coming alive around him, stores opening their gates, commuters hurrying to jobs with titles and health insurance and futures that were planned rather than survived. Cross Aviation looked different in daylight, less dramatic, less industrial, more like an actual business with a parking lot that was filling up and a glass-fronted office section that Caleb had only ever seen from outside. The hangar entrance was around back where service vehicles and employees entered, where people like him used ID badges that only opened certain doors and only during certain hours. But Vivian had said her office, which meant the front entrance, which meant walking through spaces he'd never been allowed to occupy. Caleb pushed through the glass doors at 8:52 a.m. and found himself in a reception area that was all modern design and aviation photography. Helicopters against mountain sunsets, sleek interiors that looked more like private jets than emergency vehicles, smiling clients shaking hands with Vivian in various corporate poses. The receptionist looked up from her computer with the practiced smile of someone whose job was controlling access. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" "Caleb Mercer. Ms. Cross asked me to come at 9. The smile didn't falter, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or surprise. "Of course. She mentioned you'd be coming. Let me just—" She picked up her phone, pressed a button. "Miss Cross?" "Mr. Mercer is here." A pause. "Yes, ma'am." She hung up and gestured to the leather seating area. "She'll be just a moment. Can I get you coffee? Water?" "I'm fine, thank you." Caleb sat on a chair that probably cost more than his monthly rent and tried not to feel like an imposter. He was still wearing his work clothes, the same jeans and flannel shirt he'd worn last night, because he didn't own anything that qualified as business attire and wouldn't have known what to do with it if he did. His hands were clean but calloused, his boots were functional rather than fashionable, and he was pretty sure he looked exactly like what he was, someone who didn't belong here. The elevator at the back of the reception area opened, and Vivian Cross stepped out. She'd changed since last night, traded the severe suit for dark slacks and a cream blouse that somehow looked both casual and expensive. her hair down instead of pulled back, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. She looked younger this way, less like a CEO and more like a person, though her eyes still carried that sharp assessment that probably never turned off. "Mercer," she said, crossing the space with her hand extended. "Thanks for coming." He stood and shook her hand, noting that her grip was different now, firm but not competitive, professional but not aggressive. "Ms. Cross." "Vivian," she corrected again. "We're past Ms. Cross after last night. Come on up. We need to talk privately." She led him to the elevator, pressed the button for the third floor. The doors closed, sealing them in chrome and mirrors that reflected versions of themselves Caleb didn't particularly want to see, her polished and powerful, him rumpled and out of place. "Did you sleep at all?" Vivian asked. "Some." "That's a no." She smiled slightly. "Me either. Spent most of the night reading personnel files and making phone calls I probably shouldn't have made." The elevator opened onto a hallway with offices on either side, names on plaques, the muted sound of people starting their workday. Vivian's office was at the end, corner position, windows overlooking both the hangar and the parking lot, the kind of space that announced exactly who had power here. She closed the door behind them and gestured to the chairs facing her desk. "Sit, please." Caleb sat, feeling the wrongness of it in his bones. This was a conversation where someone like him got let go as gently as possible, thanked for their service, and reminded that boundaries existed for reasons. He prepared himself for it, building the walls he'd need to walk out with dignity and tact. Vivian didn't sit behind her desk. Instead, she pulled up a chair next to him, eliminating the physical barrier, and that small gesture was somehow more unsettling than any power play could have been. "I'm going to be direct," she said, "because I think you value that, and because I've already wasted enough of your time with games. I looked into your background last night, made some calls to people I know in military aviation. Do you know what I found? I'm sure you're going to tell me. Captain Caleb Mercer, Army Aviation, rotorcraft maintenance officer, specialized in forward operating environments, 3 tours, 2 commendations, safety record that was apparently legendary among people who know what legendary means in that context." She paused. "You kept birds flying in conditions that should have grounded them permanently. You trained entire teams of mechanics. You were being fast-tracked for command." Caleb said nothing. "And then 10 years ago, you resigned your commission. Just walked away from a career that people spend lifetimes building. No explanation in the file, just resignation accepted." Vivian leaned forward. "What happened, Caleb? What makes someone with your skills and talent decide to push a mop around a hangar at night? That's personal. I know it's personal. But you walked into my hangar last night and fixed a helicopter that nobody else could fix using knowledge that you've apparently been hiding for a decade. You turned down money and recognition and opportunity because all you wanted was lights for a school workshop. Nothing about that makes sense unless there's a story behind it." "There's always a story," Caleb said quietly. "Doesn't mean it needs telling." Vivian studied him for a long moment, and he could see her calculating, measuring, trying to figure out the right approach. Finally, she sat back and changed tactics. "Fine. Keep your secrets. But let me tell you what I see. I see someone who's overqualified, underpaid, and deliberately invisible. I see someone who chose to be small when they could be big. And I need to know why, because I want to offer you a job, and I need to understand if you're going to accept it or if you're going to run." That got his attention. "What?" "A job, senior rotorcraft maintenance engineer. Salary of $95,000 plus benefits, health insurance, 4 weeks vacation, and a signing bonus that would cover about 2 years of your current rent based on the address in your employee file." She pulled a folder from her desk and set it in front of him. "It's all here. Contract terms, benefit details, everything. I had legal draft it at 4 this morning." Caleb stared at the folder like it might bite him. "You can't be serious." "I'm always serious about talent. You proved last night that you have skills this company desperately needs. You also proved that you have integrity, which is harder to find than skills. So yes, I'm serious. I want you working for me, properly working for me, not hiding in the night shift pretending to be forgettable." "I can't." He stopped, trying to organize thoughts that were suddenly chaotic. "I can't work days. I have a daughter. I need to be there when she gets home from school. So work 8 to 4 instead of 9 to 5. Or work 10 to 6. We can be flexible. Vivian opened the folder, flipped to a specific page. We can even discuss part-time arrangements if that works better for your situation. The point isn't the schedule, Caleb. The point is using your actual abilities instead of wasting them on floors that don't need cleaning. They need cleaning. Then we'll hire someone else to clean them. Someone who isn't a decorated military engineer working below minimum wage because he's afraid of being seen. Her voice had gone sharp again, frustration bleeding through the professional veneer. Help me understand this. Is it witness protection? Are you hiding from someone? Because if that's the case, I'm not hiding from anyone except myself, Caleb interrupted, and the honesty of it surprised him as much as it clearly surprised her. I'm not in trouble. I'm not running. I made a choice 10 years ago, and this is what that choice looks like. What choice? And there it was. The question he'd been avoiding, the story he never told because telling it required reliving it, and reliving it meant remembering all the ways he'd failed before he'd learned how to do better. But Vivian was looking at him with something that might have been understanding, and the folder in front of him represented a future that could give Maya everything he'd been trying to provide through invisibility and sacrifice. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop hiding from the one person who seemed genuinely interested in seeing him. My wife died, Caleb said quietly. Sarah, Maya's mother. She died giving birth to Maya. Complications that shouldn't have been complications, but I was deployed and she was alone, and by the time they reached me, by the time I got emergency leave and flew home, he stopped, throat tight. She was already gone, and I had this 7-pound baby girl who needed everything, and I had a career that meant 6-month deployments and constant transfers and being unavailable exactly when availability mattered. Vivian's expression had gone soft. I'm sorry. So I had a choice. Keep climbing, keep serving, keep doing the work I was good at, and give Maya to Sarah's parents. Let them raise her while I played hero in war zones. Or resign, come home, and be the parent she needed, even if it meant becoming someone I didn't recognize. He looked at her directly. I chose Maya. I chose being there. And that meant taking whatever job let me support us, while still being present for school and homework and bedtime and all the normal things kids need from parents who don't die on them. The silence that followed was heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Finally, Vivian reached out and gently closed the folder. You're a better person than I am, she said simply. I don't know if I could have made that choice. I'm not sure I would have even considered it a choice. I would have just optimized for career and convinced myself the kid would understand. She paused. But that doesn't mean you have to keep making the same sacrifice forever. Maya's 7 now. She's in school all day. You could work for you and give her after-school care instead of being there when she comes home. Pay someone else to help with homework and make dinner and listen to her talk about rovers and friendships and all the little things that matter. Caleb shook his head. That's exactly the trap I was trying to avoid. The minute you start trading time for money, the minute you convince yourself that your career matters more than your presence, you end up being the parent who provides everything except what actually counts. What if I told you that you could have both? That working here doesn't mean abandoning her? I'd say you're selling something I can't afford to buy. Vivian laughed, but it was gentle rather than mocking. You know what your problem is, Mercer? You're so busy being noble that you can't see opportunity when it's trying to help you. She stood and walked to the window overlooking the hangar. Let me tell you a story. My father built this company from nothing, worked himself to death, literally heart attack at 53, because he believed sacrifice was the same as love. He missed my childhood, missed my graduation, missed everything that mattered because he was always working, always building, always convinced that providing was the same as parenting. She turned back to face him. And when he died, I inherited a failing business and a lifetime of resentment. It took me years to understand that he wasn't a bad father. He was a scared father who thought money would protect me from the world. He was wrong, but he was trying. She crossed back to her desk, leaning against it. You're doing the same thing in reverse. You're so scared of being absent that you've made yourself invisible. But Maya's not going to remember that you cleaned floors at night. She's going to remember that you believed in her enough to build something better when she needed it. You don't know what she'll remember. No, Vivian agreed. But I know what I remember about my father, and it's not the business empire or the money. It's the 3 times he actually showed up: my 8th birthday, my high school science fair, and the week before he died when he finally admitted he'd made mistakes. She picked up the folder and held it out to him again. Don't make his mistakes, Caleb. Don't confuse presence with proximity. Maya doesn't need you to be invisible. She needs you to be proud of who you are, so she learns to be proud of who she is. Caleb took the folder this time, though he didn't open it. Why do you care? You humiliated me last night in front of your entire staff. You turned me into entertainment, and now you're offering me a career and life advice like we're old friends. What changed? You did, Vivian said simply. You could have taken everything I offered, the money, the kiss, the attention, and turned it into leverage. You could have demanded more, pushed for advantage, made me pay for underestimating you. Instead, you asked for lights in a school workshop, for your daughter, not even for yourself. She smiled. That's not something you see every day in my world. People who want things for others more than they want things for themselves? That's rare. That's valuable. And I'm smart enough to recognize it when it walks into my hangar and fixes the unfixable just because it's the right thing to do. I'm not special. Yes, you are. You're just too busy being humble to notice. She checked her watch. Look, I'm not asking you to decide right now. Take the folder home. Read it. Think about it. Talk to Maya. Let her know her father has options, and then make whatever choice you need to make. But do it knowing that hiding isn't the same as protecting, and sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let ourselves be seen. Caleb stood, the folder heavy in his hands with possibility and danger and futures he'd convinced himself were foreclosed. The lights, he said. At the school. Thank you for following through. I always follow through. It's kind of my thing. Vivian walked him to the door, opened it. One more thing. The engineers from last night, they've been asking about you all morning. Word spreading that the night janitor schooled the whole technical team. Henderson wants to buy you lunch. Martinez wants to collaborate on a maintenance protocol revision. She paused. You made an impression whether you wanted to or not. People see you now. Question is whether you're brave enough to let them keep seeing. He didn't have an answer for that, so he just nodded and walked back toward the elevator, past offices where people were starting to notice him, starting to whisper, starting to piece together that he was the mysterious janitor from the late-night helicopter resurrection. The receptionist smiled at him differently when he crossed the lobby. Have a good day, Mr. Mercer. We hope to see you again soon. Mr. Mercer. Not Mercer. Not the janitor. A person with a title and an identity that existed beyond maintenance carts and mops. Caleb stepped out into morning sunlight that felt different than it had 90 minutes ago, walked past his Toyota in the parking lot, and kept walking until he found himself at the elementary school on Birch Street just as the workers were finishing up. He talked his way past the front office, mentioned he was Maya Mercer's father, that he'd heard about the lighting upgrade, and made his way down to the basement workshop. It was transformed. Where before there had been flickering fluorescents and dark corners, now bright LED panels flooded every surface with clean white light. The workers were packing up their equipment, and a woman in a cross aviation polo was inspecting the installation with a clipboard. Looks good, she said to the crew chief. Ms. Cross wants photographs for documentation. She's very particular about follow-through. Caleb stood in the doorway and imagined Maya here this afternoon, unpacking her rover, finally able to see clearly enough to wire the sensors she'd been struggling with for weeks. He imagined her face lighting up brighter than any LED panel, her hands steady and confident as she built something that would carry her further than he'd ever gone. And he thought about Vivian's words. Maya doesn't need you to be invisible. She needs you to be proud of who you are, so she learns to be proud of who she is. Maybe she was right. Maybe he'd confused sacrifice with love, presence with protection. Maybe teaching Maya to aim high meant he had to stop aiming low. Or maybe he was just tired, wrung out from a night of memories and a morning of possibilities, and he needed to get home and sleep before the world demanded more decisions than he was prepared to make. But as Caleb walked back out into the winter sunshine, the folder from Vivian's office tucked under his arm, he felt something shift inside him. Not quite hope, hope was dangerous and led to disappointment, but something adjacent to it. A recognition that the future might not be as fixed as he'd convinced himself it was. That doors he'd thought permanently closed might still be openable if he could find the courage to reach for the handle. His phone buzzed. A text from Maya sent during her break. "Dad, the lights are perfect. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're the best dad in the universe." Caleb stood on the sidewalk reading that message 3 times, memorizing it, letting it settle into the place where he kept evidence that he was doing something right, even when everything felt uncertain. Then he texted back, "You're the best daughter in the universe. Build something amazing today." Her response was immediate. "I'm building 2 amazing things, the rover and a surprise for you. You'll see tonight." He smiled despite his exhaustion, pocketed his phone, and started the long walk home to an apartment that was small but sufficient, to a couch that doubled as a bed but was comfortable enough, to a life that was simple but honest and built entirely around making sure one 7-year-old girl knew she was loved enough to reach for stars. Whether he was brave enough to reach for them himself remained to be seen, but the folder under his arm suggested that maybe, just maybe, the question was worth asking. Caleb made it home by 11 and fell onto the couch with the folder still clutched in his hand, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion that felt like it had weight and texture. Sleep came hard and fast, pulling him under before he could even remove his boots. And he dreamed of helicopters that wouldn't start, and deadlines that kept moving closer, and Maya asking him why he was hiding when she could see him perfectly well. He woke to knocking at 1:47 p.m., disoriented and cotton-mouthed, his neck stiff from the angle he'd collapsed at. The knocking came again, insistent, and he stumbled to the door expecting Mrs. Chen or maybe the landlord about the constantly dripping faucet. Instead, he found Henderson standing in the hallway holding 2 paper bags that smelled like Chinese takeout and wearing an expression that was half apologetic, half determined. "Before you slam the door," Henderson said quickly, "Vivian didn't send me. I came on my own because Martinez and I have been arguing about valve systems all morning, and we need you to settle it. Also, I brought food because Martinez said you probably haven't eaten, and I'm apparently the only one with enough nerve to show up at your apartment uninvited." Caleb blinked, still half asleep. "How did you get my address?" "Employee directory. Also, Vivian mentioned you lived near Birch Elementary, and there aren't that many apartment buildings in that radius." Henderson held up the bags. "Kung Pao chicken and fried rice. Can I come in, or do I have to explain thermal expansion coefficients in your hallway where your neighbors can judge my technique?" Despite himself, despite the weirdness of having a cross-aviation engineer standing at his door, Caleb stepped aside. "You're really here to argue about valve systems?" "I'm really here to understand what you saw that we missed." Henderson entered the small apartment, taking in the space with the quick assessment of someone trained to notice details. His eyes lingered on Maya's robotics rover sitting on the kitchen table, on the drawings she'd taped to the refrigerator, on the photograph Caleb kept on the side table. Sarah holding newborn Maya, smiling like she didn't know she had hours instead of decades. "Nice place, compact." "It's small," Caleb corrected, moving to the kitchen to find plates that were clean enough. "But it works." "Small isn't bad. My first apartment was a studio where the bathroom door didn't close all the way." Henderson set the bags down and started unpacking containers. "Look, I'm going to be direct because I get the sense you don't appreciate dancing around topics. Last night, you diagnosed and repaired a problem that stumped 4 engineers with advanced degrees and 15 years of combined experience. You did it in under 2 hours using techniques that were so textbook perfect that I spent my morning reading maintenance manuals just to understand your process. It was a straightforward repair. It was elegant work by someone who knows helicopters the way most people know their own heartbeat." Henderson handed Caleb a plate loaded with food. "Vivian told us about your background. Military aviation, decorated career, the whole thing. And I need you to understand something. None of us are angry that you showed us up. We're impressed. Martinez has been talking about you like you're some kind of maintenance wizard. The younger engineers are already calling you the ghost mechanic because you appeared out of nowhere and vanished back to wherever you came from." Caleb sat at the small table, pushing aside Maya's circuit diagrams to make room. "I'm not a ghost. I'm just a janitor who used to do something else." "Yeah, you're someone who's been invisible by choice. And last night you got dragged into visibility, whether you wanted it or not. Henderson took the chair across from him, his own plate balanced carefully. So here's the thing. We need your help. Not in some abstract way, not eventually. We need it now. We've got 3 more custom orders in production, and each one has complications that our standard diagnostic protocols aren't catching. We're good engineers, Mercer. We're not incompetent. But you've got field experience we can't replicate in a classroom, and that matters. Vivian offered me a job. This morning. Senior engineer position. Henderson's face split into a genuine grin. She did? That's fantastic. When do you start? I didn't accept. The grin faded. Why not? Because I have a daughter who needs me present more than she needs me promoted. Caleb picked at his food, suddenly not hungry despite having skipped breakfast. Because I spent 10 years building a life that works, and changing it feels like gambling with her stability. Because you're scared, Henderson interrupted gently. And I get it. Change is terrifying, especially when you've got someone depending on you. But I've been watching you since last night, Mercer. The way you looked at that helicopter, the way your hands moved through that repair, that's not someone who's happy being invisible. That's someone who's been holding their breath for a decade, waiting for permission to exhale. You don't know me. No, but I know what it looks like when someone's lying to themselves about what they want. Henderson leaned forward. You want to know what I think? I think you miss it. I think you miss working on helicopters, miss using your brain for something more than floor cleaning schedules. I think you've convinced yourself that sacrifice equals love, and now you're trapped in a story you've been telling yourself for so long you've forgotten it's fiction. The words landed like punches, and Caleb felt his defenses rising. My daughter isn't fiction. My responsibility to her isn't something I made up. Of course not. But the idea that you have to be small for her to be big, that's fiction. That's a narrative you built to protect yourself from the guilt of your wife dying while you were deployed. Henderson's voice was quiet, but firm. And I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because from the outside, it's obvious that you're punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. And you're using Maya as the excuse to keep the punishment going. Caleb stood abruptly, his chair scraping against linoleum. You need to leave. I will, but first, hear me out. Henderson didn't move from his seat. Martinez lost her husband 3 years ago. Car accident, sudden, stupid, the kind of random tragedy that makes you question everything. She had 2 kids, 6 and 8 at the time. And for about a year, she did exactly what you're doing, made herself small, took a lesser position, convinced herself that being present meant being diminished. He paused. You know what her kids told her eventually? They said they missed having a happy mom. They said they'd rather see her less and see her fulfilled than see her every day and watch her slowly disappear. That's not the same. It's exactly the same. You're disappearing, Mercer. Maybe not physically, but emotionally, professionally, personally. You're vanishing into a role that doesn't fit because you think that's what good fathers do. But good fathers teach their kids to be brave enough to use their gifts. How's Maya supposed to learn that if you're too scared to use yours? The silence that followed was broken only by the dripping faucet, its irregular rhythm marking seconds that felt heavy with accusation and truth. Caleb stared at the folder on his couch, at the job offer he'd been carrying around like evidence of temptation, at the future Vivian was offering that felt both impossible and inevitable. I don't know how to do this, he said finally, quietly. I don't know how to be both. The father who's there and the professional who matters. Know how to be one or the other. Then learn. Henderson stood, moving to stand beside him. That's what we do, right? We learn. We adapt. We figure out solutions to problems that seem impossible until we break them down into manageable pieces. He gestured at Maya's rover. Your daughter's building a robot that can navigate obstacles autonomously. She's 7 years old and she's programming obstacle avoidance. Where do you think she learned that kind of problem solving? Her mother was smart. I'm sure she was. But I bet she learned some of it from you, from watching you approach problems methodically, from seeing you take care of things even when they're hard. Henderson picked up his bag, preparing to leave. Just think about it. That's all I'm asking. Think about whether the story you've been telling yourself is the one you want Maya to remember when she's older. He let himself out, leaving Caleb alone with Chinese food he couldn't eat, and thoughts that wouldn't settle, and the persistent sense that his carefully constructed world was developing cracks he didn't know how to patch. At 3:15 p.m., Caleb's phone rang. Unknown number, but he answered anyway because unknown numbers sometimes meant school emergencies or doctor's offices or other things that required immediate attention. Mr. Mercer, this is Principal Davies from Birch Elementary. I wanted to call personally to thank you for the incredible lighting upgrade in our STEM workshop. The contractor mentioned you were responsible? Caleb's throat tightened. I just asked for help. Cross Aviation did the actual work. Well, your asking resulted in a $15,000 installation that our budget couldn't have supported for another 2 years. The teachers are thrilled, the students are excited, and Maya spent her entire lunch period showing her friends her rover under proper lighting. Principal Davies paused. She's very proud of you, Mr. Mercer. She told everyone her dad was magic. She exaggerates. Perhaps, but magic or not, you've made a real difference for these kids. Thank you. The principal hesitated. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but Maya mentioned you work nights. If you ever need flexibility for school events or parent conferences, please don't hesitate to reach out. We appreciate parents who show up for their children however they can. The call ended, and Caleb sat holding his phone, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of expectations he'd spent a decade trying to avoid. Everyone wanted him to be more. Henderson wanted him to be an engineer again. Vivian wanted him to accept opportunity. Maya wanted him to be magic. Principal Davies wanted him to be appreciated. But nobody asked what he wanted, and he'd spent so long not wanting anything for himself that the question felt foreign. What did he want? He looked at the folder again, and this time he opened it. The contract was straightforward, the salary number shocking in its size, the benefits package reading like something from a different life. $95,000 a year plus health insurance, dental, vision, 401k matching, 4 weeks paid vacation. Flexible scheduling with core hours from 10 to 3. Option for remote work on documentation days. Signing bonus of $15,000 paid upon contract execution. It was more money than he'd seen in a decade. It was security and stability and the ability to stop worrying about transmission repairs and whether he could afford Maya's field trip fees. It was everything he'd been scraping by without, offered freely if he'd just agree to be visible again. But it was also change, and change meant risk, and risk meant the possibility of failing Maya the way he'd failed Sarah by being thousands of miles away when it mattered most. Caleb was still sitting there, paralyzed by possibility, when his phone buzzed with a text from a number he now recognized as Vivian's. Henderson just called me. Said he ambushed you with Chinese food and unsolicited advice. I apologize. I didn't send him, but I'm not sorry he went. Sometimes we need people to tell us truths we're avoiding. No pressure on the job offer. But if you have questions, I'm available. V. He typed back, Why does this matter so much to you? The response took several minutes, and when it came, it was longer than her usual efficient messages. Because I see myself in you. Not the sacrifice part. I'm not selfless enough for that. But the hiding part. I built this company by being hard, by never showing weakness, by making sure everyone knew I was the smartest person in the room. It made me successful and lonely and so focused on proving my father wrong that I forgot to ask if I was proving myself right. You're doing something similar. You're so focused on not being absent that you've forgotten to be present. And I hope, that if I can help you stop hiding, maybe I can figure out how to stop hiding too. Does that make sense? Caleb stared at the message for a long time, reading vulnerability he hadn't expected from someone who seemed constructed entirely of confidence and sharp edges. He thought about responding, thought about asking what she was hiding from, but ultimately he just sent back, It makes sense. Thank you. At 3:45 p.m., he forced himself to shower and change clothes, to eat the cold Chinese food and drink water and perform the basic maintenance his body needed. Then he grabbed the folder and walked back to the elementary school to pick up Maya, arriving 20 minutes early because his internal clock was still confused about what time of day it was. He found her in the workshop, exactly where he knew she'd be, surrounded by other kids and their projects. The new lights were almost aggressive in their brightness, illuminating every corner, making everything crisp and clear. Maya was on the floor with her rover, two other girls leaning over to watch as she adjusted something on the circuit board with the careful precision of a surgeon. No, see, the sensor needs to detect obstacles at least 10 centimeters away, or the turning algorithm doesn't have time to react, she was explaining. So we have to calibrate the sensitivity right here, where the voltage meets the Dad! She'd looked up and seen him, and her face transformed with joy so pure it made his chest ache. She jumped up and ran to him, nearly tripping over another kid's project in her enthusiasm. You're early! You're never early! Did you see the lights? Aren't they perfect? Mrs. Patterson says we can work on our projects after school now because we can actually see, and I finished the whole sensor array, and my rover can detect obstacles from 12 centimeters away, which is better than 10, and… She stopped, finally taking a breath, her gray eyes shining. Are you okay? You look tired. I'm okay, sweetheart, just had a long day. But you're supposed to be sleeping during the day. You always sleep when I'm at school. She frowned, concerned in that way 7-year-olds could be when their world's patterns shifted unexpectedly. Did something happen? Some things are changing, Caleb said carefully. We should probably talk about it. Want to go home? Maya looked back at her rover, at her friends still working on their projects, at the bright lights that represented possibility. Can we stay a little longer? I'm so close to finishing the programming, and Rachel wants to see if my obstacle detection is better than hers, and Mrs. Patterson said she'd help us test them. Sure. Take your time. I'll wait. He found a seat on one of the workshop benches and watched his daughter return to her robot, to her friends, to the kind of focused problem-solving that came naturally to her because she'd never been taught to doubt her capability. She worked with confidence and joy, explaining her design choices to the other kids, helping Rachel troubleshoot a wiring issue, completely at home in her competence. Where had she learned that? Not from him. He'd spent a decade teaching her through example that hiding was safer than shining. But somehow, despite his best efforts to make himself small, Maya had absorbed a different lesson. She'd seen him fix things, help people, solve problems without needing recognition, and she'd interpreted that as permission to be brilliant without apology. Henderson's words came back to him. Good fathers teach their kids to be brave enough to use their gifts. How's Maya supposed to learn that if you're too scared to use yours? Maybe he'd been teaching her the wrong lesson all along. Maybe by hiding his abilities, he'd been suggesting that capability was something to be ashamed of rather than celebrated. Maybe the best thing he could do for Maya wasn't to be invisible, but to show her what it looked like to be fully, proudly, competently present. Mrs. Patterson, the STEM teacher, approached him with a warm smile. Mr. Mercer, thank you again for making this happen. The difference these lights make is incredible. I'm glad they help. Maya's been telling everyone her father is an engineer who fixes helicopters. Mrs. Patterson's smile widened. She's very proud of you. I hope you know that. I'm just a… Caleb stopped himself, hearing how the automatic denial would sound, how it would diminish what Maya saw in him. Thank you. She's pretty great herself. She is. Brilliant kid, kind heart, natural leader. Whatever you and your wife did… She stopped, seeing something in his expression. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to presume. Her mother passed away when Maya was born, Caleb said quietly. It's been just the two of us. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened with understanding. Then you're doing an exceptional job. Single parents don't hear that enough, but it's true. Maya is thriving, and that's because of you. She gestured toward the workshop. She's going to do amazing things. Kids like her with that combination of technical skill and genuine curiosity, they change the world if we give them the chance. She moved away to help another student, leaving Caleb alone with that assessment. Maya was going to do amazing things. The question was whether he was going to teach her that amazing things required hiding your light, or whether he was brave enough to show her that being extraordinary was something to embrace rather than apologize for. At 4:30 p.m., Maya finally packed up her rover, satisfied with her progress. They walked home together in the late afternoon light, her hand in his, her chatter filling the space between buildings with excited updates about sensors and algorithms and how Rachel's robot was fast, but hers was smarter. Dad, she said as they climbed the stairs to their apartment, can I ask you something? Always. Mrs. Patterson said you used to fix helicopters in the Army, real helicopters that flew in important places. She looked up at him, curious and careful. Is that true? Caleb felt his heart rate increase, the old instinct to deflect rising automatically. But he looked at his daughter's face, at her open curiosity, and made a choice. Yes, he said, that's true. Why did you stop? Because when you were born, I needed to be here for you more than I needed to fix helicopters. And being here meant doing different work that let me have different hours. They reached their door, and Maya was quiet while he unlocked it, her expression thoughtful in that serious way she had when processing complex information. Inside, she set her backpack carefully on the couch and turned to face him. Did you like fixing helicopters? The question was simple, but the answer was anything but. Caleb thought about the roar of rotors, the smell of aviation fuel, the satisfaction of making broken things whole, the pride of keeping people safe. He thought about who he'd been before Sarah died, before guilt and grief had convinced him that wanting anything for himself was a betrayal of the responsibilities he'd failed. Yes, he said honestly, I loved it. Then why can't you do both? Fix helicopters and be my dad. Maya's voice was small but determined. I'm at school all day anyway, and Mrs. Chen likes watching me after school. She says I'm her favorite tenant even though I'm not a tenant. I'm just a kid who lives next door. It's complicated, sweetheart. That's what grown-ups say when they don't want to explain. She crossed her arms, a miniature version of determination. I'm not a baby, Dad. I can understand complicated. Try me. So Caleb sat down on the couch and pulled her next to him, and he tried to explain the last 10 years in terms a 7-year-old could grasp. He told her about being far away when Mommy got sick, about feeling like he'd failed the most important job he'd ever had. He told her about choosing to be close instead of impressive, about how cleaning floors at night meant he could always be there when she needed him. He told her about the helicopter, about Vivian's offer, about the choice he was trying to make. Maya listened with the focused attention she usually reserved for circuit diagrams, her small face serious. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Dad, she said finally, I think you're making a mistake. What do you mean? You think you failed Mommy because you weren't here, but you didn't fail. You were working, doing important things, and she knew that, right? She knew you were helping people? Maya's voice was matter-of-fact, the logic clear to her even if it had eluded him for a decade. So you being far away wasn't failing. It was just bad luck. Bad things happen sometimes. That's not the same as failing. Caleb felt something crack open in his chest, some locked door he'd been guarding for years. It felt like failing. I know, but feelings aren't always right. That's what Mrs. Chen says. She says sometimes our feelings lie to us to keep us safe, but if we believe them too much, we end up safe and sad instead of brave and happy. Maya climbed into his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. I don't want you to be safe and sad, Dad. I want you to be brave and happy, like how you want me to be brave enough to enter the robotics competition, even though I might not win. You're going to do great in that competition. Maybe, but even if I don't, you'll be proud of me for trying, right? For using my skills and doing my best. She pulled back to look at him. That's all I want for you too, to be proud of yourself for trying, for being who you really are instead of pretending to be smaller. Out of the mouths of children came wisdom that adults spent lifetimes avoiding. Caleb held his daughter and felt the weight of her simple truth settling into places he'd kept carefully barricaded. She was right. She was 7 years old and she could see what he'd been blind to, that he'd been punishing himself with invisibility, mistaking smallness for safety and sacrifice for love. You're pretty smart, you know that? He said, his voice rough. I get it from you. And from Mommy, but mostly from you because you're here teaching me. Maya grinned. So are you going to take the job? Are you going to fix helicopters again? I don't know yet. It's a big decision. Then let's make a list. You love lists. You're always making lists for grocery shopping and bill paying and stuff. She jumped off his lap and ran to get paper and markers from her school supplies. We'll write down good things about taking the job and bad things, and then we'll see which side is bigger. So they sat at the kitchen table where Maya had been building her rover, and they made a list in her careful 7-year-old handwriting. Good things included more money, health insurance, using dad's skills, being proud, teaching Maya to be brave, and fixing cool helicopters. Bad things included change being scary, less time together maybe, and having to wake up early. When they finished, the good side had 7 items and the bad side had 3. And Maya looked at him with the satisfaction of someone who'd solved a mathematical proof. See? The good side wins. You should take the job. It's not always that simple, sweetheart. Why not? If there are more good things than bad things, and the bad things aren't even that bad, then the choice is obvious. She tapped the paper with her marker. That's logic. That's what you taught me. Look at the data and make the smart decision. Caleb laughed despite himself. Despite the fear still sitting heavy in his chest, despite the decade of carefully constructed reasons why staying invisible was the only safe option. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just noticed because I used good logic. Maya set down her marker and looked at him seriously. I love you, Dad. Whether you fix helicopters or clean floors or do anything else, I love you the same. But I want you to be happy, and I don't think you're happy right now. I think you're pretending. The truth of it hit him like a physical force. She was right. He'd been pretending for so long that he'd almost convinced himself the performance was real. But Maya could see through it, because children always could, because love made them perceptive in ways that adults forgot how to be. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, what? Okay, I'll think about it seriously. I'll really consider taking the job. He pulled her close again. But whatever I decide, you need to know that you're the most important thing in my life. Everything I do for you. I know, Dad, but maybe you could do some things for you too. Mrs. Chen says that's called self-care, and it's important. Maya hugged him tight. I'm going to work on my rover now. You should work on your decision, but I think you already know what you want to do. You're just scared. She slipped away to her room, leaving him alone with the list and the folder and the future that was demanding a response. And she was right. He did know what he wanted. He'd known since Henderson showed up with Chinese food and uncomfortable truths, since Vivian shared her own hiding and vulnerability, since Principal Davies called to say Maya was proud of him. He wanted to stop being invisible. He wanted to use his hands for something more than cleaning floors. He wanted Maya to learn by example that being extraordinary wasn't something to apologize for, but something to embrace with both pride and humility. He wanted to fix helicopters again. But wanting and choosing were different animals, and the gap between them was filled with fear that had calcified into habit over 10 years of playing it safe. Fear that if he reached for more, he'd lose what he had. Fear that being visible meant being vulnerable. Fear that the universe would punish him again for having the audacity to be good at something that mattered. Caleb picked up his phone and stared at Vivian's number for a long time before typing. I need to ask you something. Her response was immediate. Ask. If I take this job and it doesn't work out, if I can't balance it with Maya, if I'm not as good as I used to be, if I fail, will you destroy me like you said you would if I'd failed to fix the helicopter? The reply took longer this time, and he could imagine her considering her words carefully. No. If you try and it doesn't work, we'll figure something else out. I don't punish people for being human, Mercer. I punish people for being lazy or dishonest. You're neither. You're just scared, and that's okay. Scared people can still be brave. They just have to choose it. How do I choose it? Same way you chose to fix my helicopter in front of everyone. Same way you chose to ask for lights instead of money. You just decide the outcome matters more than the risk, and then you act before fear talks you out of it. Caleb looked at the contract on his couch, at the folder that represented a future he'd been afraid to want, at Maya's list with its childish wisdom about good things outweighing bad things. He thought about Sarah and what she would say if she were here, and he realized she'd probably be furious that he'd spent a decade making himself small in her name. Sarah had been brilliant and bold, had loved his competence as much as his kindness, had chosen him precisely because he was someone who fixed impossible things and kept people safe. She would have wanted Maya raised by that person, not by the shadow he'd become. So Caleb made a decision. Not because it was easy or safe, but because his 7-year-old daughter had just taught him that sometimes the brave thing and the smart thing were the same thing, and refusing to see that was just cowardice dressed up as sacrifice. He picked up a pen, turned to the signature page of the contract, and signed his name before fear could stop him. Then he texted Vivian, "I accept. When do I start?" Her response was almost gleeful. "Monday, 10 a.m. Bring your tools and your expertise and whatever else you've been hiding. Welcome back to the world, Mercer. Try to enjoy it." He sat there for several minutes, heart pounding, waiting for regret or panic or the certainty that he'd just made a terrible mistake. But what came instead was something lighter, something that felt almost like relief. The weight he'd been carrying for 10 years, the guilt, the fear, the conviction that he deserved to be invisible, had started to lift, and in its absence was space for something he'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Maya's voice called from her room. "Dad? Did you decide?" "Yeah, sweetheart, I decided." "And?" "And you're going to have a dad who fixes helicopters." The shriek of joy that followed was loud enough that Mrs. Chen banged on the adjoining wall, but when Caleb went over to apologize, she just smiled and said she'd been wondering how long it would take him to stop punishing himself for the crime of being human. Apparently everyone had been able to see what he'd been blind to, but now his eyes were open, and the future that had seemed impossible yesterday was suddenly, terrifyingly, wonderfully real. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation that felt both mundane and monumental. Caleb spent Saturday morning with Maya at the laundromat, washing the 3 button-down shirts he owned that could pass for professional attire, while she quizzed him on what engineers wore to work and whether helicopters had feelings about who fixed them. Sunday involved a trip to the thrift store where Maya insisted he needed a real work bag instead of his old duffel, and they found a leather messenger bag that was worn but dignified, the kind of thing a person with a career might carry. Mrs. Chen watched these preparations with the knowing smile of someone who'd been waiting for this transformation, and on Sunday evening she showed up at their door with a container of her famous dumplings and a tie that had belonged to her late husband. "You don't need to," Caleb started, but she cut him off. Henry would want someone to use it. He was an engineer too, civil, not aviation, but he understood about showing up properly for important work. She pressed the tie into his hands, navy blue with a subtle pattern. "Besides, Maya told me everything. She's very proud. Don't disappoint her by showing up looking like you're apologizing for existing." Monday morning arrived with the aggressive brightness of March sunshine through thin curtains, and Caleb woke at 6:30 a.m. feeling like an imposter in his own life. The face in his bathroom mirror looked the same, maybe slightly less exhausted than usual. But the context was different. Today, he wasn't the night janitor. Today, he was Senior Rotorcraft Maintenance Engineer Caleb Mercer, and the title felt like clothes that didn't quite fit yet. Maya was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her cereal and a hand-drawn card that read, "Good luck, Dad. You're going to be amazing," in careful marker letters with helicopters drawn in the margins. "I made you this," she announced, holding it up, "for your first day. Mrs. Patterson says first days are scary, so people need encouragement." Caleb took the card and felt his throat tighten. "It's perfect, sweetheart. Thank you." "Are you nervous?" "Terrified." "That's normal. I was terrified on my first day of first grade, but then I made friends and learned things, and it was okay." She spooned cereal into her mouth, then added thoughtfully, "You're going to make friends too. Henderson already likes you, and Ms. Cross obviously likes you, or she wouldn't have made you sign all those papers." "It's more complicated than that." "Adults always say that." Maya grinned. "But usually it's not. Usually people just like each other and work together and things are fine. You're making it complicated because you're nervous." Out of the mouths of children, Caleb thought again, came truths that cut through years of carefully constructed anxiety. She was probably right. It probably was that simple, and he was the one adding layers of fear and doubt that didn't need to be there. He drove the Toyota to Cross Aviation, arriving at 9:45 a.m. with his new messenger bag and Mrs. Chen's husband's tie and Maya's encouragement card tucked in his pocket like a talisman. The parking lot was full of vehicles that looked newer and more expensive than his, and for a moment he considered just driving away, going back to the apartment, texting Vivian that he'd made a mistake. But then he saw Henderson getting out of his truck, saw the older engineer spot him and wave enthusiastically, and the moment for running passed. "Mercer, you actually showed up!" Henderson jogged over, genuinely pleased. "I had a bet with Martinez that you'd change your mind. I just lost $20, but I've never been happier to lose." "I signed a contract." "Yeah, but contracts can be broken. Pride is harder to put back together." Henderson clapped him on the shoulder. "Come on, Vivian's waiting in the engineering bay. We've got 3 helicopters in various states of customization, and she wants you to do a comprehensive assessment on all of them. Consider it your first day orientation/baptism by fire." They walked through the main entrance together, past the receptionist who smiled at Caleb like he was a person, instead of an obstacle to work around, past the offices where people were settling into their Monday routines. Henderson kept up a running commentary about who worked where, which projects were active, which clients were demanding versus reasonable. And Caleb tried to absorb information while simultaneously managing the low-grade panic that kept suggesting this was all a terrible idea. The engineering bay was a massive space adjacent to the main hangar, filled with workbenches and diagnostic equipment and the particular organized chaos of technical work in progress. 3 helicopters occupied the floor space in various states of assembly, one with its engine cowling removed, one with its interior stripped out, one that looked complete but sat wrong somehow, its nose tilted at an angle that suggested landing gear issues. Martinez was already there, examining something on a tablet, and when she saw Caleb, she broke into a huge smile. "You came! Oh, thank goodness, you actually came! I was worried Henderson's pep talk scared you off." "It almost did," Caleb admitted. "Well, I'm glad it didn't. We need you." She gestured around the bay. "These birds are all custom orders with specific complications. The H-125 over there is a high-altitude configuration for mountain rescue in Colorado, needs specialized engine modifications for thin air performance. The H-35 is a luxury executive transport with integrated medical capabilities. Client wants it to function as both a corporate shuttle and emergency evac, which is creating interesting weight distribution challenges. And that H-145 is supposedly flight-ready, but failed its pre-delivery test for reasons we can't quite pin down. And you want me to assess all 3? "We want you to tell us what we're missing," Henderson corrected. "We're good at standard maintenance and installation, but you've got field experience with edge cases and battlefield adaptations. You see things we don't because you learned in places where missing things meant casualties." Before Caleb could respond, Vivian's voice cut through the bay. "Mercer, you're early. I like that." She emerged from the glass-walled office at the back of the bay, dressed in dark jeans and a cross-aviation polo that somehow looked more professional than most people's suits. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she carried 2 cups of coffee, handing one to Caleb without asking if he wanted it. "Welcome to your first day. How are you feeling?" "Like I might throw up." Vivian laughed, genuine and warm. "Also good. Fear means you care. Caring means you'll be careful, and careful is what keeps helicopters in the air." She gestured for him to follow her toward the first helicopter. "Let's start with the H-125. Martinez, walk him through what you've done so far and where you're stuck." The next hour passed in a kind of focused intensity that Caleb had forgotten he was capable of experiencing. Martinez explained the high-altitude modifications, the challenges of maintaining power output in thin air, the various solutions they'd attempted, and the testing results that suggested something was still off. Henderson provided additional context about client specifications and certification requirements, and Caleb listened, really listened, and felt his mind engaging with technical problems in ways it hadn't been allowed to for a decade. It was like waking up a part of himself that had been sleeping, like remembering a language he'd thought he'd forgotten. His hands itched to touch the engine components, to verify torque specifications, to run his own diagnostics instead of relying on someone else's reports. "Can I open it up?" he asked, interrupting Martinez mid-explanation. She blinked. "The engine? Sure, I mean, that's why you're here. You want to see the modifications directly?" "I want to see what you did versus what the specifications called for. Sometimes the gap between intention and execution is where problems hide." Caleb set down his coffee and moved to the helicopter, his hands already reaching for access panels with the automatic confidence of someone who'd done this thousands of times. Vivian caught Henderson's eye and smiled. Henderson smiled back, both of them recognizing what was happening. Caleb was disappearing into the work. the fear and self-consciousness falling away as muscle memory and expertise took over. For the next 90 minutes, Caleb worked through the H-125's engine modifications with methodical precision, checking tolerances, verifying installation specifications, running diagnostic sequences that went deeper than standard protocols. Martinez and Henderson assisted, handing him tools and pulling up technical documentation, and gradually Caleb forgot to be nervous about being seen because the helicopter demanded his full attention. He found the problem at 11:47 a.m., a fuel injection timing issue that was subtle enough to pass standard diagnostics, but significant enough to reduce power output at high altitudes. The modification had been installed correctly, but the calibration was off by fractions of a degree, and at 12,000 feet those fractions would add up to inadequate power reserves. "There," Caleb said, pointing to the diagnostic readout on his tablet. "The injection timing is factory standard, but with these high-altitude modifications, you need to advance it by 0.4 degrees to compensate for air density changes. The computer's trying to adjust in real time, but it's chasing optimal performance instead of maintaining it, which causes the power fluctuations you were seeing in the test flights." Martinez stared at the screen, then at the engine, then back at the screen. "That's incredibly specific. How did you even know to check injection timing?" "Because I've seen this failure mode before. Different helicopter, different altitude, same symptom pattern." Caleb wiped his hands on a shop towel, suddenly aware that he'd completely lost himself in the work, that hours had passed without him noticing. "In Afghanistan, we had Apaches modified for high-altitude operations, and we kept getting inconsistent power output until someone figured out that the fuel injection calibration needed to be adjusted beyond manufacturer specs. It's counterintuitive because you'd think the computer would handle it, but there's a lag in the adaptive algorithm that creates a performance gap." Henderson was grinning like he'd just witnessed something miraculous. "You just solved a problem we've been chasing for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of test flights and diagnostic reviews and consulting with the manufacturer, and you found it in under 2 hours. I just knew where to look." "That's not just anything, Mercer. That's expertise." Vivian had been watching from a distance, and now she approached with an expression that was hard to read. "You want to know what I see right now? I see someone who belongs exactly where they are, doing exactly what they were meant to do. And I see that you forgot to be scared about 40 minutes ago." Caleb realized she was right. Somewhere between opening the engine cowling and identifying the timing issue, the fear had evaporated. He'd been too focused on solving the problem to remember he was supposed to be worried about whether he could still solve problems. "That's the thing about good work," Vivian continued. "It doesn't leave room for self-doubt. You're either capable or you're not, and the machine will tell you the truth pretty quickly." She checked her watch. "It's almost noon. Let's break for lunch. Martinez, can you implement Mercer's calibration adjustment this afternoon and schedule a test flight for tomorrow?" "Absolutely. And Mercer?" Martinez looked at him with something close to awe. "Thank you. Seriously. That client's been breathing down our necks, and you just saved us weeks of frustration." They broke for lunch in the engineering bay's break room, a space with vending machines and microwave and furniture that had seen better days. Henderson had brought extra sandwiches. "I figured you'd forget to pack lunch on your first day." And they sat around a table covered in technical drawings and coffee rings while discussing the other 2 helicopters. But halfway through his sandwich, Caleb's phone buzzed. Principal Davies calling from Birch Elementary. His heart immediately jumped to worst-case scenarios. Maya hurt, Maya sick, Maya in trouble, and he answered before the second ring. "Hello? Mr. Mercer? I'm sorry to call during your work hours. Maya's fine," Principal Davies said quickly, recognizing panic when she heard it. "But we have a small situation. Maya's robotics rover has stopped working, and she's quite upset. She says there's something wrong with the sensor array, and she can't figure out what. I know you're at work now, but she asked if I could call you for advice." Caleb felt torn in 2 directions. He'd been here less than 3 hours. He was in the middle of his first day. Walking away to help with a school robot would look exactly like what Vivian had worried about, that he couldn't balance fatherhood with professional responsibility. But it was Maya, and she needed him, and that was supposed to matter more than anything else. "I can," he started, but Vivian cut him off. "Henderson, do we have any robotics components in the prototype lab? Servo motors, circuit boards, that sort of thing? Henderson looked confused but nodded. Yeah, we keep a stock for testing automated systems. Why? Because Mercer's daughter is having a technical emergency at school, and we're going to help solve it. Vivian stood, already moving toward her office. Mercer, tell the principal we'll be there in 20 minutes with diagnostic equipment and replacement parts if necessary. Henderson, grab whatever robotics components we have, small scale, kid-friendly. Martinez, you're coming too because this is now a company team-building exercise. Vivian, you don't have to, Caleb protested. I absolutely do. You think I'm letting you spend your first day worried about whether your daughter's okay? She was already pulling on a jacket, grabbing keys. Besides, I want to meet this kid who builds obstacle avoidance robots at 7 years old. That's future engineer material right there, and I like getting to them early. 15 minutes later, Caleb found himself in Vivian's Range Rover with Henderson and Martinez following in Henderson's truck, heading toward Birch Elementary with a box of robotics components and a CEO who'd apparently decided that customer service extended to employees' children. You really didn't have to do this, Caleb said again. Stop saying that. I'm not doing it for you. Well, not entirely. Vivian navigated through traffic with the aggressive confidence of someone who viewed speed limits as suggestions. I'm doing it because flexible work environments mean actually being flexible when life happens. Your daughter's robot broke. She's upset. You're the person who can help. That matters more than whatever was on this afternoon's schedule. But it's my first day, which is exactly why it matters. I need you to understand that working for me doesn't mean choosing between being a good father and being a good engineer. It means being both, and sometimes that means we all pile into vehicles and go fix a 7-year-old's robot, because that's what good companies do for good people. They pulled up to Birch Elementary at 12:34 p.m., and Principal Davies met them at the entrance with obvious surprise. Mr. Mercer, I didn't expect... And you brought colleagues. And equipment, Henderson added cheerfully, holding up the box of components. Where's the patient? Principal Davies led them to the STEM workshop, where Maya sat at one of the brightly lit tables, her rover in pieces in front of her, her face streaked with tears she was trying to hide. When she saw Caleb, her expression crumbled completely. Dad, I broke it. The competition is in 2 weeks, and I broke my robot, and I don't know how to fix it. And she stopped when she realized he wasn't alone, that there were 3 other adults with him, that one of them was a woman who looked important and intimidating. Hey, sweetheart. It's okay. Caleb knelt beside her chair. Breaking things is part of building things. Let's figure out what happened. The ultrasonic sensor stopped reading correctly. It keeps saying everything is 0 centimeters away, even when there's nothing there, so the rover thinks it's stuck and won't move. Maya hiccuped, trying to stop crying. I checked all the wiring 3 times and I can't find what's wrong. Vivian moved forward slowly, non-threateningly, and knelt on Maya's other side. Hi, Maya. I'm Vivian. I work with your dad. Can I look at your robot? Maya glanced at Caleb for permission. He nodded, and she pushed the rover toward Vivian with trembling hands. Vivian examined the rover with the same focused attention she'd give a multi-million-dollar helicopter, turning it carefully, checking connections, her face serious. This is impressive work, really impressive. The sensor mounting is clean, the wiring is organized, the code structure. She pulled up the programming interface on Maya's laptop. This is elegant problem solving. How long have you been building robots? Since last year. Dad taught me about circuits, and Mrs. Patterson taught me about programming. Maya's voice was small but steadier now. I really want to win the competition, or at least not embarrass myself. You won't embarrass yourself with work like this. Vivian handed the rover to Henderson. Can you check the sensor itself? I think it might be a hardware failure rather than a programming issue. Henderson pulled out a multimeter from the box of components and began testing the sensor's electrical properties. Meanwhile, Martinez had pulled up a chair next to Maya and was looking at her code with genuine interest. You wrote this obstacle avoidance algorithm yourself? Martinez asked. Dad helped with some of the math parts, but mostly it's mine. Maya watched Henderson work on her robot with nervous attention. Is it really broken? Like broken? Because I don't have money for a new sensor. If it's broken, we'll replace it, Vivian said firmly. Let's see what Henderson finds first. Henderson made a thoughtful sound. Sensor's fine electrically, but there's some debris on the transducer face. Looks like adhesive residue or something. It's interfering with the ultrasonic signal transmission. He looked up at Maya. Did you recently remount this sensor? Yesterday. I wanted to adjust the angle, so I used double-sided tape to hold it while I drilled new holes, but I cleaned it off. Maya's face fell. I thought I cleaned it off. You got most of it, but these sensors are really sensitive. Even a tiny bit of residue can cause signal distortion. Henderson pulled out a specialty cleaning solution and precision swabs from the component box. This is what we use for cleaning optical and acoustic sensors on our helicopters. Let's try this. He worked on the sensor with careful attention while Maya watched, her tears drying as hope replaced despair. Caleb stood behind his daughter's chair, one hand on her shoulder, and caught Vivian's eye. She smiled at him, and the smile said everything. This was right. This was what good work cultures looked like. This was why she'd insisted on coming. 5 minutes later, Henderson reinstalled the sensor and powered up the rover. Okay, Maya, run your diagnostic routine. Maya's fingers flew over her laptop keyboard, executing commands with the confidence of someone who'd written the code herself. The rover beeped, its small screen displaying sensor readings that now showed accurate distance measurements. It works! Maya launched herself at Henderson, hugging him before she remembered she didn't actually know him. She pulled back, embarrassed. Sorry, I didn't mean to. No apologies necessary. Henderson was grinning. That's the best payment an engineer can get. A client who's happy their equipment works. You're going to do great in that competition, Maya. Martinez had been studying Maya's code more carefully. This is really sophisticated for your age. Have you thought about what you want to be when you grow up? An aerospace engineer, like my dad. Maya said it with absolute certainty, and Caleb felt his heart squeeze. I want to fix things that fly and help people. That's the most important kind of engineering. Vivian caught Caleb's expression and smiled wider. Your dad's pretty good at that. We're lucky to have him on our team. She stood, brushing off her jeans. Maya, I have a proposition for you. Cross Aviation sponsors a youth STEM program every summer. High school kids usually, but I think we could make an exception for someone with your skills. Would you be interested in coming to our facility once a week to work with real engineers on real projects? With your dad there too, obviously. Maya's eyes went huge. Really? Like a real job? More like an apprenticeship. You'd learn, we'd learn, everyone wins. Talk it over with your dad. Vivian handed Caleb a business card. Think about it. She's got talent, Mercer. Might as well develop it properly. They left Maya in the workshop with her fully functional rover and renewed confidence, and as they walked back to the vehicles, Henderson was practically bouncing with enthusiasm. That was amazing. Did you see her code? The way she structured her obstacle detection algorithm? She's 7, and she's already thinking like an engineer. He looked at Caleb. You must be incredibly proud. Every single day, Caleb said quietly. Back at Cross Aviation, the afternoon passed in a blur of technical work that felt like coming home. Caleb moved between the 3 helicopters with growing confidence, identifying issues that the team had been circling without quite seeing, explaining his reasoning in ways that made Henderson and Martinez light up with understanding. The H-135 luxury executive transport had weight distribution problems that traced back to the placement of medical equipment, a solution that involved relocating some components and reinforcing specific structural points. The supposedly flight-ready H-145 had a subtle hydraulic pressure leak that was slow enough to avoid immediate detection, but fast enough to cause failures during extended operations. By 4:30 p.m., Caleb had documented solutions for all 3 helicopters, written detailed maintenance protocols, and scheduled follow-up inspections. His hands were covered in grease despite multiple washings. His shirt had a suspicious stain that might have been hydraulic fluid, and he felt more exhausted and more alive than he had in 10 years. Vivian found him in the engineering bay as he was packing up, making sure his tools were cleaned and organized the way they should be. Good first day? Terrifying and wonderful, Caleb admitted. I kept waiting for someone to figure out I don't belong here. Everyone feels that way at first. The difference is whether you let the feeling stop you or whether you work through it. She leaned against his workbench. You did good today, Mercer. Really good. Found problems we'd been missing, taught the team new diagnostic approaches, and showed them what expertise looks like when it's not hiding. She paused. And you handled the Maya situation exactly right. Family emergencies happen, good companies adapt. Thank you for coming to help her. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Because the kind of company I want to run is one where people don't have to choose between their work and their lives. Where showing up means bringing your whole self, including the parts that have 7-year-old daughters who build robots. Vivian pushed off from the workbench. Go home, Mercer. Tomorrow we'll do test flights on the H-125 after your calibration fix. You should be there for that. See your solution work in real conditions. Caleb drove home with the radio off, processing the day in silence. He'd survived. More than survived. He'd succeeded, had proven that his skills weren't gone, just dormant, waiting for permission to wake up. He'd helped Maya, had met her crisis without having to choose between her and his work, had watched Vivian demonstrate what good leadership actually looked like. Maya was waiting for him at Mrs. Chen's apartment, working on her rover's programming while Mrs. Chen made dinner. When Caleb appeared, Maya ran to him with an enthusiasm that made Mrs. Chen laugh. Your friends are so cool, Maya announced. Henderson said I have good engineering instincts, and Martinez said my code was elegant, and Ms. Cross said I could work at Cross Aviation this summer. Can I, Dad? Can I do the apprenticeship program? We'll talk about it, Caleb said, but he was smiling. First, tell me what you learned today. I learned that even when things feel completely broken, sometimes they're just dirty and need proper cleaning. Maya grinned. Also that having people who know things help you is way better than trying to figure everything out alone. Also that your boss is kind of scary, but in a cool way. Mrs. Chen brought them plates of food and shooed them toward her dining table. Your daughter told me about her robot crisis, and about the cavalry showing up to save the day. That's a good company you're working for, Caleb. Yeah, Caleb agreed, surprising himself with how much he meant it. It really is. That night, after Maya was asleep with her rover carefully stored on her desk, and her dreams probably filled with competitions and sensors and summer apprenticeships, Caleb sat on his couch and realized something had fundamentally shifted. He'd spent the day being visible, being competent, being exactly who he used to be, and the sky hadn't fallen. Maya was fine. He was fine. The fear he'd been carrying for a decade, that being good at something would somehow cost him everything, had proven to be exactly what Henderson said it was, a story he'd been telling himself that had calcified into false truth. His phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. Henderson and Martinez want to take you to lunch tomorrow. Fair warning, they're going to ask you approximately 8,000 technical questions. You created monsters by being competent. Hope you're prepared for the consequences. Caleb smiled and typed back, I think I can handle it. Good. Because we've got 5 more custom orders coming down the pipeline, and I have a feeling you're going to be very busy. Sleep well, Mercer. You earned it. He set his phone aside and looked around the small apartment that had been his sanctuary for 10 years, the place where he'd hidden from the world and convinced himself he was protecting Maya by being small. But Maya didn't need him small. She needed him proud and present and brave enough to reach for the things he was capable of, so she could learn to reach for the things she was capable of. Tomorrow there would be test flights and technical challenges and probably more moments where he'd have to choose courage over comfort. But tonight, Caleb Mercer allowed himself to feel something he'd been afraid to feel for far too long. He felt like himself again, and it turned out that being himself, fully, proudly, without apology, was exactly what both he and Maya had needed all along. The test flight was scheduled for 8 a.m. Tuesday, and Caleb arrived at the hangar at 7 to help with pre-flight checks. The H-125 sat on the tarmac like a white promise, its high-altitude modifications gleaming under the early morning sun. Henderson was already there with a checklist, and Martinez was running final diagnostic sequences on her tablet. But when Caleb approached, they both looked at him with expressions that suggested something had changed overnight. What? Caleb asked, suddenly worried he'd missed something critical. Vivian wants you to fly observer seat, Henderson said. On the test flight. She says you need to see your calibration fix work in real conditions, verify performance metrics firsthand. Caleb's stomach dropped. I haven't been in a helicopter in 10 years, which is about 9 years longer than most engineers go between flights, Martinez pointed out. Besides, you're not flying it. You're just observing, taking notes. Being the expert who can assess whether the engine performance matches predicted specifications. Who's piloting? Vivian. Henderson grinned at Caleb's expression. Oh, did we forget to mention that our CEO is also a rated helicopter pilot with about 3,000 hours? Yeah, she doesn't advertise it because she thinks it intimidates clients, but she's better than half the commercial pilots we contract with. Before Caleb could process that information, Vivian herself appeared from the hangar office, dressed in a flight suit that looked both professional and slightly ridiculous on someone he'd only ever seen in business attire. She carried 2 headsets and a flight plan clipboard, and her expression was all business. Mercer, you ready? We've got a 2-hour window for this test before the winds pick up. She handed him one of the headsets. We'll do a standard performance envelope test, pushing the engine through various altitude and power settings. Your job is to monitor the fuel injection timing and power output. Watch for the fluctuations we were seeing before your fix. If anything feels off, you speak up immediately. My ego can handle being wrong, but it can't handle crashing a $4 million helicopter. Vivian, I'm not sure I'm qualified to. You're the most qualified person here, she interrupted. You diagnose the problem, you prescribe the solution, and you have field experience with high-performance engine operations. Henderson and Martinez are brilliant engineers, but neither of them has kept birds flying in combat conditions. You have. So stop arguing and get in the helicopter. 10 minutes later, Caleb found himself strapped into the observer seat with a tablet showing real-time engine diagnostics, and his heart attempting to escape through his ribcage. The cockpit smelled like leather, and aviation fuel, and possibility, and when Vivian powered up the engine, the familiar whine of turbines spinning to life hit him like a physical force. He'd forgotten how much he missed this sound. Cross Aviation Test Flight 1, requesting clearance for local area operations, Vivian said into her headset, her voice crisp and professional. The tower responded with coordinates and altitude restrictions, and she acknowledged with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. The helicopter lifted smoothly, that particular stomach-dropping sensation of leaving the ground in a rotorcraft, and suddenly they were airborne and climbing. Caleb watched the altimeter spin upward, 500 feet, 1,000, 1,500, while monitoring his tablet for any signs of the power fluctuations that had plagued previous test flights. Engine parameters looking good so far, he reported, falling into the old rhythm of flight operations communication. Fuel injection timing holding steady at your calibration. Power output consistent across the curve. Copy that. Taking her to 5,000 feet, then we'll do some power-on climbs to simulate high-altitude operations. Vivian handled the controls with relaxed confidence, and Caleb realized Henderson was right. She was a genuinely skilled pilot. How you doing over there, Mercer? You've gone quiet. Just processing, he said honestly. It's been a while. Since you've been in a helicopter, or since you've let yourself remember who you used to be? The question landed harder than turbulence. Caleb looked out the window at the landscape falling away beneath them, the city spreading out in its geometric patterns, and felt the truth of her words settling into place. He'd been avoiding this, not just helicopters, but everything they represented about competence and capability and the life he'd walked away from. Both, he admitted. Well, welcome back. Try to enjoy it. Vivian pushed the helicopter into a climbing turn, and Caleb felt his body remember the sensation, the way momentum and gravity played against each other in rotorcraft dynamics. I'm going to be honest with you about something. When I first saw you in that hangar, just the janitor pushing a mop around, I made assumptions, thought you were invisible because you were unremarkable, and then you fixed my helicopter and I realized I'd been completely wrong. You weren't unremarkable. You were hiding. I wasn't hiding. I was protecting my daughter. From what? Success? Opportunity? The possibility that her father might be exceptional at something? Vivian leveled off at 5,000 feet and began the first power climb sequence. I've been thinking about that a lot since we talked, about why someone with your skills would choose to be invisible. And I think I understand now. You weren't protecting Maya from anything external. You were protecting yourself from guilt. Caleb checked his tablet, buying time. The engine was performing perfectly. power output steady even as Vivian pushed it through increasingly demanding maneuvers. You're not a therapist. No, but I am someone who spent most of her life hiding behind work because it was easier than dealing with the fact that my father died thinking I resented him. Her voice was matter-of-fact through the headset, clinical even while discussing pain. Took me years to understand that I didn't resent him for being absent. I resented him for making me believe that absence was the same as love, that sacrifice meant never being happy, that being good at something required giving up everything else. She executed another climb, the helicopter responding smoothly to her inputs. Sound familiar? It's not the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. You convinced yourself that being there for Maya meant making yourself small, that using your actual abilities would somehow betray your commitment to fatherhood. But you know what the real betrayal would be? Teaching her that talent is something to apologize for, that being exceptional requires permission from other people who are too scared to be exceptional themselves. The landscape had changed during their climb. They were over mountains now, the terrain becoming more rugged, the kind of conditions the H-125's high-altitude modifications were designed to handle. Vivian pushed the helicopter higher, and Caleb watched his tablet carefully for any signs of the power degradation they'd experienced before his calibration fix. Nothing. The engine held steady, power output remaining consistent, even as air density decreased. His solution had worked. Engine performance nominal, Caleb reported. No fluctuations, no power loss. Fuel injection timing is compensating perfectly for altitude changes. Your bird's ready for mountain operations. Our bird, Vivian corrected. You fixed it. That makes it partly yours. She began a descent, bringing them back down through the altitude bands with smooth precision. I'm going to tell you something that Henderson and Martinez don't know. Cross Aviation is expanding. We've got contracts for 6 more custom helicopters, and we're looking at acquiring a competitor in Oregon that specializes in emergency medical configurations. This company is about to get much bigger, much faster, and I need people I can trust to maintain quality while we scale. She glanced at him. I'm offering you a position as Director of Maintenance Operations. You'd oversee all technical work, train new engineers, establish protocols and standards. Significant pay increase, equity stake in the company, and enough authority to build the kind of maintenance culture you think is right. Interested? Caleb's brain stuttered. I've been here 2 days. And in those 2 days, you've solved problems my team couldn't solve in weeks. You've demonstrated leadership and teaching ability. And you've shown me that you understand what quality really means. Vivian brought the helicopter lower, heading back toward Cross Aviation. I don't need years to recognize talent, Mercer. I just need evidence. You've given me plenty. I have a 7-year-old daughter. Who would benefit from watching her father succeed? Who would learn that you can be both present and professional? Who would see that being good at something doesn't mean abandoning the people you love? Vivian's voice softened. Look, I get it. Change is terrifying. Visibility is dangerous, but so is hiding. So is teaching Maya that she should make herself small to make other people comfortable. You want her to reach for stars? Show her how. They landed at 9:47 a.m., the helicopter settling onto the tarmac with barely a bump. Henderson and Martinez were waiting, eager for the test flight report, and Caleb spent the next hour walking them through the performance data and confirming that the calibration fix had completely resolved the power fluctuation issues. The client would be thrilled. The helicopter was certified ready for delivery. But Caleb's mind was elsewhere, turning over Vivian's offer and her words about hiding and teaching and what kind of example he was really setting for Maya. He'd convinced himself that sacrifice was love, but what if he'd been wrong? What if the real love was showing Maya that you could reach for exceptional things while still being present for the people who mattered? At lunch, Henderson and Martinez did indeed ask 8,000 technical questions, but they also told stories about their own careers, about the mistakes they'd made and the lessons they'd learned and the ways they'd figured out how to balance professional ambition with personal lives. Martinez talked about her kids and how she'd eventually realized that being a present parent meant being a fulfilled parent, not a diminished one. Henderson described his own crisis of confidence early in his career when he'd almost quit engineering because he didn't think he was smart enough, and how a mentor had convinced him that doubt was just fear disguised as humility. And Caleb listened and realized these were his people now. engineers who cared about helicopters and precision and getting things right, but who also understood that technical expertise was only valuable if it was connected to human purpose. They weren't asking him to choose between being a father and being an engineer. They were showing him how to be both. That afternoon, Caleb called Principal Davies and asked about Maya's robotics competition. It was scheduled for Saturday, 2 weeks away, at the Regional Science Center. He blocked out the entire day on his calendar, making sure Vivian knew he wouldn't be available for any work commitments. "Wouldn't dream of scheduling anything," Vivian had said when he told her. "I want to come watch, actually. See this robot you and Maya built together. Henderson and Martinez want to come too. We'll make it a cross-aviation field trip." "You don't have to do that." "Stop telling me what I have to do. I want to see your daughter compete. I want to watch her be brilliant and brave. Consider it market research. Future engineer recruitment." She paused. "Also, Mercer, have you thought about my offer, Director of Maintenance Operations?" "I'm still processing." "Process faster. I need an answer by Friday because if you say no, I have to start looking for someone else. And frankly, everyone else is going to be a disappointment after you." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of technical work that felt like coming home and family time that felt richer somehow, now that Caleb wasn't carrying the weight of invisible martyrdom. He worked his 10 to 4 schedule, picking Maya up from school most days, helping her refine her rover's programming in the evenings, while Mrs. Chen cooked dinner and offered unsolicited but usually correct advice about both robotics and life. Maya's confidence grew as the competition approached. Her rover could navigate the practice course flawlessly now, detecting obstacles and adjusting its path with the kind of smooth efficiency that came from careful programming and patient testing. She'd added features Caleb hadn't suggested: a LED light system that changed colors based on sensor status, a sound alert that played different tones for different obstacle types, and watching her innovate beyond his expertise filled him with a pride so intense it was almost painful. On Thursday night, 5 days before the competition, Maya was working on her rover's final calibrations when she looked up at Caleb with sudden seriousness. "Dad, can I ask you something important?" "Always." "Are you happy? Like really happy, not just pretend happy?" Her gray eyes, his eyes, studied him carefully. "Because Mrs. Chen says you seem different lately. Lighter," she said. "Like you're not carrying something heavy anymore." Caleb set down the circuit diagram he'd been reviewing and gave Maya his full attention. "I think I am happy. Happier than I've been in a long time." "Why?" "Because I want to make sure this is good for you, not just good for me. Ms. Cross offered you that big promotion, and you haven't told me if you're going to take it, and I think you're worried about what I'll think." Maya put down her screwdriver. "But Dad, I want you to take it. I want you to be the Director of Maintenance Operations and oversee all the technical work and train engineers and do all the important things you're good at. What if it means less time together? Then we'll make the time we have count more." She said it with the simple wisdom of children who haven't learned yet that some problems are supposed to be complicated. Quality over quantity, that's what Mrs. Patterson says. And I'd rather have less time with a dad who's proud of himself than more time with a dad who's hiding. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just started listening." Maya grinned, then turned serious again. "Take the job, Dad. Be proud. Show me that it's okay to be good at things and want recognition for being good. That's what I need to learn from you. Not how to hide, how to shine." That night, after Maya was asleep, Caleb sent a text to Vivian. "I accept. Director of Maintenance Operations. When do we start?" Her response was immediate. "Technically, you already started. Congratulations, Director Mercer. We'll discuss details Monday. For now, focus on Saturday. Your daughter's big day takes priority. V." Saturday morning arrived with the kind of bright sunshine that felt like approval from the universe. Maya was up before dawn, triple-checking her rover, reviewing her presentation notes, practicing her explanations for the judges. She'd chosen to wear the t-shirt Henderson had given her that week. Cross Aviation logo on the front, Future Engineer printed on the back. And she looked both terrified and thrilled in equal measure. The Regional Science Center was packed with kids and robots and parents when they arrived at 8:30 a.m. The competition was structured in two parts. First, the rovers had to navigate an obstacle course autonomously. And second, each participant had to present their design choices and programming logic to a panel of judges. Maya's age group, 7 to 9 years old, was scheduled for 10 to 10 a.m. Caleb was helping Maya set up in the staging area when Vivian appeared with Henderson and Martinez in tow, all three wearing cross aviation polo shirts like they were a team here to support their newest recruit. "We come bearing moral support and caffeine," Vivian announced, handing Caleb a coffee. She knelt down to Maya's level. "How are you feeling, engineer?" "Scared and excited," Maya admitted. "There's so many kids here with really good robots." "Yes, but do any of them have your obstacle detection algorithm? The one that updates in real time based on sensor feedback? Because that's advanced programming for someone 3 times your age." Vivian's expression was serious, respectful. "You belong here, Maya. You earned your spot. Now show them what you can do." The competition began with a parade of robots attempting the obstacle course with varying degrees of success. Some crashed immediately, victims of poor sensor calibration or overly aggressive speed settings. Some made it partway through before getting stuck in corners or confused by the course's deliberately tricky false paths. A few performed well, navigating smoothly with the kind of precision that came from extensive testing and refinement. Then it was Maya's turn. She placed her rover at the starting line, double-checked all connections, and activated the autonomous mode. The rover's LED lights shifted to green, all systems operational, and it began moving forward with confident purpose. Caleb held his breath as the rover approached the first obstacle, a foam barrier positioned to require a precise 90-degree turn. The sensors detected it at exactly the right distance, the rover adjusted its path smoothly, and it continued forward without hesitation. The second obstacle was more complex, a series of staggered barriers that required multiple course corrections. But Maya's algorithm handled it perfectly, the rover weaving through like it had memorized the pattern. Henderson was muttering technical observations under his breath. Martinez had pulled out her phone to record. Vivian stood with her arms crossed, watching with the focused attention she usually reserved for million-dollar test flights. The rover completed the course in 2 minutes and 17 seconds. Not the fastest time, but executed with such smooth precision that several parents and judges were already talking about the quality of the programming. Maya's face was split by a smile so huge it looked like it might break her in half. "You did it!" Caleb lifted her up, spinning her around. "Perfect run, sweetheart. Every detection, every turn, exactly right." "Did you see when it did the weaving part? That's the algorithm modification I made on Thursday. The one where it predicts obstacle patterns instead of just reacting." Maya was vibrating with excitement. "It worked even better than in practice." The presentation portion was scheduled for after lunch, giving Maya time to decompress and prepare. They found a quiet corner where she reviewed her notes while eating a sandwich, and Caleb could see her shifting into presentation mode, organizing her thoughts, preparing to explain her work to people who might not understand all the technical details. Vivian sat down next to them. "Maya, can I give you some advice about talking to judges?" Maya nodded, suddenly shy around this impressive woman her father worked for. "The judges are going to ask you questions designed to see if you really understand what you built, or if an adult did it for you. They'll push to find the edges of your knowledge." Vivian's tone was matter-of-fact, preparing Maya for reality rather than coddling her. "When they ask something you don't know, don't make up an answer. Say, 'That's a great question and I don't know the answer yet, but I'd like to learn.' Judges respect honesty more than fake expertise." "What if they think I'm not smart enough?" "Then they're wrong, and their being wrong doesn't change how smart you actually are." Vivian smiled. "You built something impressive, Maya. You programmed an algorithm that adapts in real time to environmental conditions. That's graduate-level problem solving. Some judges won't recognize that because they're used to underestimating kids. But the good judges will see it, and they're the ones who matter." Maya absorbed this wisdom with serious consideration, then asked, "Are you nervous when people judge your work?" "Terrified," Vivian admitted, "every single time. But I've learned that being nervous just means you care about doing well. It doesn't mean you're going to fail. It means what you're doing matters to you." At 2 o'clock p.m., Maya presented to the judges, 3 engineers from local tech companies, all of them looking skeptical that a 7-year-old could have built what the competition results suggested she'd built. Caleb watched from his observation area, too far away to hear the conversation, but close enough to see Maya's body language shift from nervous to confident as she walked them through her design process. She had her laptop open, showing them her code. She pointed to specific components on her rover, explaining sensor placement and power management decisions. And when one judge, a middle-aged man whose body language screamed skepticism, asked her something that made her pause, she straightened her shoulders and said something that made him laugh and nod. 20 minutes later, Maya emerged from the presentation room looking exhausted and exhilarated. They asked really hard questions, she reported, like about why I chose ultrasonic sensors instead of infrared, and how my algorithm handles sensor noise, and what I'd do differently if I built it again. But I think I answered okay. One judge said my code structure was remarkably mature and asked if I wanted to enter the high school division next year. What did you say? I said I wanted to master this division first, but maybe in 2 years. Maya grinned. Was that the right answer? That was a perfect answer, Vivian said. She'd been standing close enough to hear. Confident but not cocky, ambitious but not unrealistic. You're a natural, kid. The award ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock p.m., after all age groups had completed their competitions. Maya's division had 23 entries, and the judges would award first through third place based on a combination of course performance and presentation quality. They gathered in the Science Center's auditorium with hundreds of other families, and Caleb felt his stomach nodding with nervous energy that had nothing to do with helicopters and everything to do with wanting his daughter to feel successful and valued. The MC worked through the older age groups first, each winner receiving a medal and a certificate and enthusiastic applause. Then finally they reached the 7 to 9 division, and Caleb reached for Maya's hand. Third place in the 7 to 9 division goes to Evan Martinez for his line-following robot with integrated obstacle detection. Applause. A 10-year-old boy bounded up to receive his medal, grinning. Second place goes to Sophia Chen for her voice-controlled navigation system with manual override capability. More applause. An 8-year-old girl in glasses walked confidently to the stage, her parents cheering loudly. Caleb felt Maya's hand tighten in his. First place was all that remained, and there were 21 other competitors who might have earned it. The odds were not in her favor, and he prepared himself to comfort her, to remind her that participating was the real achievement, that she'd impressed everyone who watched her rover's smooth performance. And first place in the 7 to 9 division? The MC paused for dramatic effect, and Caleb felt time stretch impossibly long. Goes to Maya Mercer for her adaptive obstacle avoidance system with real-time algorithm optimization. The auditorium erupted in applause, but Caleb heard none of it because Maya had launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck and crying, not sad tears, but the overwhelming emotion of achievement and recognition and validation that she was as capable as she'd believed herself to be. You won, Caleb said into her hair, his own eyes burning. You did it, sweetheart. First place. We did it, Maya corrected, pulling back to look at him with those gray eyes that saw everything. I built it, but you taught me how to think like an engineer. This is because of you, Dad. No, Vivian said, appearing beside them with Henderson and Martinez. This is because of her. Because she was brave enough to try, smart enough to learn, and determined enough to refine her work until it was excellent. You gave her tools, Mercer, but she built something remarkable all on her own. Maya went to the stage to receive her medal and certificate, and she stood there in her future engineer t-shirt, looking small and fierce and absolutely radiant. The judges gave a brief explanation of why they'd chosen her project. The sophisticated programming, the smooth execution, the clear understanding of engineering principles, and then one judge added something that wasn't part of the standard announcement. Maya's presentation demonstrated something we don't often see even in adult engineers. She understood not just how her robot worked, but why she'd made each design choice. She could articulate trade-offs, explain her problem-solving process, and discuss what she'd learned from failures. That level of metacognition is rare and valuable. We're excited to see what she builds next. The applause that followed was thunderous. And Caleb found himself surrounded by Henderson and Martinez, both of them making jokes about needing to recruit Maya for Cross Aviation's engineering team in about 11 years. Seriously, though, Martinez said, wiping at her eyes, that was amazing. Your kid's the real deal, Mercer. She is, Caleb agreed, and felt something settle in his chest. Pride, yes, but also relief. Relief that despite his 10 years of hiding and doubting and trying to make himself invisible, he'd somehow still managed to teach Maya to be visible, to be capable without apology, to reach for excellence and claim it when she achieved it. After the ceremony, several other parents approached Caleb to ask about Maya's programming, about how he'd taught her, about what resources they could use for their own kids. And Caleb found himself explaining, recommending websites and books, talking about the importance of letting kids fail and try again, about treating children's engineering questions with the same seriousness you'd treat an adult's. One mother, whose son had placed 5th, looked at Caleb with curiosity. You're clearly an engineer yourself. What do you do? I'm Director of Maintenance Operations at Cross Aviation, Caleb said, and felt the title sit comfortably in his mouth for the first time. We specialize in custom helicopter configurations, but mostly right now I'm Maya's dad and her biggest fan. Vivian overheard this exchange and smiled so wide it transformed her face from intimidating CEO to something warmer, more human. When the families started to disperse, she pulled Caleb aside for a private conversation. I'm proud of you, she said simply. Not for the work you do at Cross Aviation, though that's excellent, but for this, for showing up for your daughter, for teaching her that being exceptional is something to celebrate, for being brave enough to let yourself be visible so she could learn to be visible too. She taught me more than I taught her. That's what kids do. They show us who we're supposed to be if we're willing to pay attention. Vivian paused. I meant what I said about the director position. Starting Monday, you're building the maintenance culture for a company that's about to get very big. That's a lot of responsibility, but I think you're ready for it. More importantly, I think Maya needs to see you ready for it. What about when I mess up? When I'm not perfect? Then you model how to handle failure with grace and learn from it. That's maybe the most important lesson of all. Vivian checked her watch. Look, there's something I want to show you. Are you free for about an hour? Both of you? Maya had been talking to some of the other competitors, comparing robot designs and exchanging programming tips with the confidence of someone who just won first place and knew she belonged among her peers. When Caleb called her over and explained that Vivian wanted to show them something, she grabbed her rover and followed with eager curiosity. They drove in Vivian's Range Rover to Cross Aviation, and Caleb was confused because they'd just spent 5 days a week there, and he couldn't imagine what required showing on a Saturday evening. But Vivian led them past the engineering bay, past the offices, to a section of the facility Caleb had never accessed, a hangar space that was currently empty except for a single helicopter in the center. It was an H-125, similar to the one Caleb had fixed for high-altitude operations. But this one was painted in Cross Aviation's colors with something extra on the tail, a small logo that read Maya's Wings Outreach Program. What is this, Feet? Caleb asked. This is what I'm doing with some of the profit from all those contracts you've been helping us fulfill. Vivian walked toward the helicopter with obvious pride. Maya's Wings is going to be a youth aviation program. Free helicopter experiences for underprivileged kids, STEM education programs, mentorship opportunities. I'm partnering with schools across the state to identify talented kids who might not otherwise get access to aviation or engineering. She turned to face Maya directly. Your dad told me about the lights in your school workshop, about how sometimes smart kids don't get the resources they need just because of budget cuts or bad luck. This program is about fixing that, about making sure kids like you, kids with talent and drive and curiosity, get chances to develop their abilities regardless of their circumstances. Maya's eyes were huge. You're doing this because of me? I'm doing this because of both of you, because your dad showed me that sometimes the most valuable people are the ones we overlook. Because you showed me that talent doesn't wait for permission or perfect circumstances. Vivian knelt down to Maya's level. I'd like you to be one of our first program participants. This summer, instead of just the regular apprenticeship I mentioned, what if you spent time learning about helicopter engineering? Watching your dad work, yes, but also understanding the bigger picture of what we do and why it matters. Really? Like a real aerospace engineer? Like an engineer in training, with your father supervising, obviously, and with projects appropriate for your age. But yes, learning real skills, solving real problems, being part of a team that builds things that fly and help people. Vivian looked at Caleb. If that's okay with Dad, of course. Caleb found himself speechless, staring at this helicopter that bore his daughter's name, at this program that existed because he'd asked for lights in a school workshop instead of money or recognition. He'd spent 10 years trying to be invisible, and somehow that invisibility had led to this. To a CEO who cared enough to create opportunities for kids who might otherwise be overlooked. To a daughter who was being offered chances he'd never imagined. To a life that felt suddenly full of possibility instead of just survival. It's more than okay, Caleb managed. It's incredible. Thank you. Thank your daughter. She's the one who reminded me what matters. Vivian stood and addressed them both. This company is growing, and I want it to grow in the right direction. Not just bigger, but better. Not just more profitable, but more purposeful. You're both part of that vision now. Maya, you're our inspiration for why we do this work. And Caleb, you're the person who's going to make sure we never lose sight of quality and integrity as we scale. Maya walked up to the helicopter and touched it gently, reverently, like it might disappear if she wasn't careful. Dad, there's a helicopter with my name on it. How is this real? Because you were brave enough to be brilliant, Caleb said, joining her. And because sometimes the universe rewards people who reach for things, even when they're scared. They spent another 30 minutes in that hangar, Vivian explaining the outreach program's goals and timeline, Maya asking approximately 1 million questions about helicopters and flight mechanics, and whether she could actually go up in one someday. Henderson and Martinez had followed them to the facility and joined the conversation, already volunteering to help with the educational programming and mentorship components. As the sun set outside and the hangar lights came on, Caleb found a quiet moment to stand back and watch. Watch Maya chattering excitedly with Martinez about rotor aerodynamics. Watch Henderson pulling up helicopter schematics on his phone to show her how collective pitch control worked. Watch Vivian coordinating with her team about program logistics, her face animated with enthusiasm for this project that was about more than profit or recognition. This was what being visible looked like. Not just being seen, but using that visibility to create ripples, to open doors for others, to build something bigger than just individual success. He'd been so afraid that stepping into the light would cost him everything, but instead it had multiplied everything. Maya had opportunities she wouldn't have had if he'd stayed invisible. The company had a maintenance culture that prioritized quality and integrity. Kids across the state would get access to aviation and engineering because he'd asked for school lights instead of money. Mrs. Chen had been right all along. He'd been magic. Not because he could fix helicopters, but because he'd been willing to be kind and present and authentic, even when the world told him to be small. And that magic had multiplied through Maya, through Vivian, through every person who'd been touched by the choice to help rather than hide. Dad? Maya's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Can we come back tomorrow? Ms. Cross said I could help clean the helicopter if we come back, that it's important for engineers to understand maintenance. We'll come back tomorrow, Caleb promised, and the day after that, and as many days as you want. This is your world now too, sweetheart. Your wings, your future, your choice to reach as high as you want to go. They left Cross Aviation as the sky turned purple and gold, the kind of sunset that felt like punctuation on important days. Maya fell asleep in the back seat on the drive home, her first-place medal still around her neck, her rover secured carefully in its box, her dreams probably filled with helicopters and algorithms and futures that stretched toward horizons she was brave enough to explore. Caleb carried her upstairs to their apartment, tucked her into bed without waking her, and stood in her doorway watching her sleep the way he'd done countless times over the past 7 years. But tonight felt different. Tonight he wasn't standing there consumed by guilt about all the ways he might fail her. Tonight he was standing there proud of all the ways they were succeeding together. His phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. Monday morning, 9 a.m., my office. We need to discuss the director transition plan and your ideas for scaling the maintenance program. Come prepared with thoughts on team structure and training protocols. Also, thank you. For today, for trusting me, for being willing to step into the light. You're changing this company for the better." Caleb smiled and typed back, "Thank you for giving me the chance to remember who I was and discover who I could be. See you Monday." He walked to his couch, which he'd finally replaced with an actual bed last week, a purchase that felt like admitting he was allowed to have things, and sat in the quiet apartment thinking about the journey from that night in the hangar when Vivian had humiliated him with a public dare to this evening when she'd shown him a helicopter bearing his daughter's name. The path from invisible janitor to director of maintenance operations hadn't been straight or simple. It had required confronting fears he'd been nursing for a decade, accepting help from people who saw value in him, even when he couldn't see it himself, and learning that protecting Maya didn't mean hiding from the world. It meant showing her how to engage with it bravely and authentically. He'd thought sacrifice was love. He'd thought being small was safety. He'd thought that using his abilities would somehow betray the commitment he'd made to be present for his daughter. But he'd been wrong about all of it. Real love was showing Maya that she could be extraordinary without apologizing. Real safety was building a life with enough stability and joy that unexpected challenges didn't destroy everything. Real commitment was being fully present as his whole self, engineer, father, person, rather than some diminished version he thought was more acceptable. Outside the window, the city lights sparkled against the night sky like promises waiting to be kept. And Caleb Mercer, who had spent 10 years being invisible, allowed himself to be seen fully for the first time since Sarah's death. Allowed himself to be competent and vulnerable, talented and uncertain, professional and devoted, all at the same time without contradiction. Somewhere in the city, a CEO was planning an outreach program that would change lives. Somewhere in the next room, a 7-year-old engineer was dreaming dreams big enough to fill hangars. And somewhere in the space between who he'd been and who he was becoming, Caleb found peace with the man he saw in the mirror. He'd fixed helicopters and raised a daughter and learned to be visible again. He'd asked for lights instead of money and somehow ended up with opportunities worth more than either. He'd been brave enough to say yes when every instinct screamed to hide, and that bravery had opened doors he didn't even know existed. Monday would bring new challenges, leadership responsibilities, team management, the pressure of building something excellent at scale. But tonight, Caleb just let himself feel grateful. Grateful for Henderson's unwelcome visit with Chinese food and hard truths. Grateful for Martinez's kindness and support. Grateful for Vivian's willingness to see past his job title to recognize his capabilities. Grateful for Mrs. Chen's wisdom and Maya's clarity and all the people who'd refused to let him stay invisible when visibility was what he needed most. The future was uncertain, as futures always were. But for the first time in 10 years, uncertain felt like possibility instead of threat. The lights were on. In Maya's workshop, in his career, in the parts of himself he'd kept dark for too long. And in that brightness, Caleb could finally see clearly enough to choose joy over guilt, presence over perfection, and the complicated, beautiful truth that being a good father and being an excellent engineer weren't opposing forces. They were the same thing, two expressions of the same commitment to showing up fully, working carefully, and building things that mattered. Maya stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about sensor arrays and obstacle detection, and Caleb smiled. His daughter was going to do extraordinary things, and this time, instead of watching from the shadows, he'd be right there beside her, visible, present, proud, teaching her by example that being extraordinary was something to celebrate rather than hide. The janitor who'd fixed a helicopter to earn school lights had become the director who'd helped build a program bearing his daughter's name. The invisible man had learned to be seen. The scared father had found the courage to reach for more. And under the quiet stars and the city lights and the weight of hard-won wisdom, Caleb Mercer finally understood what Sarah would have wanted him to know all along, that the best way to honor her memory wasn't to make himself small, but to be big enough for both of them, to live fully enough, love deeply enough, and reach high enough that Maya would always know her parents, both of them, had believed she deserved a world of possibility. The lights were on, the future was bright, and tomorrow they would build something beautiful together.